Good morning. Welcome to the third and final day of the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. I'm Lawrence Bender. I'm an attorney here in Bismarck, and I also serve as Vice President of the North Dakota Petroleum Council Board of Directors. We have a tremendous lineup of events for you to hear today. We'll be hearing from some of our Bakken CEOs. Kendall with Denbury will be making a presentation. Bob Phillips with Crestwood Midstream will also be here today. And then Bill Berry with Continental Resources will be presenting as well. We'll be joined by Lynn Helms, the Director of the North Dakota Petroleum Council, the North Dakota Industrial Commission, and Congressman Kelly Armstrong, and last but not least, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Before we launch into today's lineup, I'd like to give you a quick update on the conference. We were a bit nervous when we planned this event on how many people we'd attend, but we just had an absolutely tremendous turnout, as you have seen. We've had over 2,600 registrants from all over the country, and we're very, very pleased at the turnout. Once again, we want to thank the 75 sponsors and the 270 exhibitors who came out and decided to present at this event. Now, to start the final day of the conference, it's my pleasure to introduce our first guest, North Dakota Congressman Kelly Armstrong. Congressman Armstrong was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 2018. He serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, which has broad jurisdiction over climate matters. Congressman Armstrong is a lifelong North Dakotan. He has a background in law and business. Kelly opened up a law firm in Dickinson, North Dakota in 2004. He joined the family oil company in 2011 and also the family agricultural business in 2012. He was elected to the North Dakota Senate for District 36 and served in that capacity for 2 terms. And then in 2018, he was elected to the United States House of Representatives. Unfortunately, Congressman Armstrong could not be with us here today because of business he has in D.C., but he will be appearing by video.
Greetings all, and welcome to the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. I wish I could join you in person, as this event is absolutely one of my favorites. As most of you know, I grew up in the oil and gas industry, and I'm lucky to call you all my friends. And first, I'd like to thank you for your hard work and dedication to ensuring that North Dakota remains a top oil and gas producing state. The shale revolution began right here in North Dakota, and it has helped pave the way towards American energy independence and ensuring our country's national security. Thanks to the innovations refined right here in the Bakken, American energy security is a geopolitical advantage that is reaping benefits for our country and the world. Iran and other bad actors no longer have the leverage to wreak havoc on world energy markets. Because of this, our military and national security teams are better able to make calculated responses that help advance our long-term strategic goals. Yet despite these successes, unelected bureaucrats at alphabet soup federal agencies are implementing business-killing regulations without regard for the people and industries they affect. Regulations like the Clean Power Plan, Waters of the U.S., and Paris Climate Accord are just job-killing endeavors masquerading as feel-good rules. We know that our status as an energy powerhouse was hard-fought and can be easily lost if we don't have the policies that support responsible development of America's vast natural resources. Over the 4 years of President Trump's administration, we saw that when you reduce regulatory burden, allow states to regulate, and reduce barriers to entry, businesses and energy markets thrive, and North Dakota communities grow. This is why I'm concerned about the recent policies and decisions from President Biden's administration that jeopardize our country's energy independence, national security, and the millions of jobs created and supported by this industry throughout the country. The never-ending saga and constant litigation associated with the Dakota Access Pipeline is just one example of an infrastructure project that has been vetted and operating for years without issue. Now it is at risk of being shut down due to activist litigation and political pressure. This comes on the heels of President Biden's decision to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline after it was subject to maybe the most rigorous review process in history. Events like this conference and organizations such as the Petroleum Council are essential to our fight against the policies and politicians that threaten the way of life for so many in Western North Dakota. And in North Dakota, we are the best stewards of our abundant resources, and we need to continue to push back against the bureaucrats in Washington who try to dictate how we utilize them. In DC, I continue to advocate for North Dakota's energy workers, but I need your help to keep up the pressure. I hear from many of you often, and our voice is always best when we work together. Please continue to reach out to me with your strong advocacy for our industry. And speaking of supporting North Dakota energy, it is my honor to introduce the next speaker, who is one of our biggest supporters. As the director of the North Dakota Department of Mineral Resources, Lynn Helms has been an invaluable asset to North Dakota's energy producers and lawmakers. If there is anyone who is an expert in North Dakota's energy and development, it is Lynn. He continues to do a great job for our state, and we are lucky to have his experience on our side. And I am proud and pleased to call him a good personal friend. Thank you all for joining us, or for allowing me to join you virtually today, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a
Well, good morning, oil and gas. Thank you for coming to our Bismarck Petroleum Conference. Thank you for coming to our great state of North Dakota and investing your capital, investing your time, your treasure, and your talent in making North Dakota a better and better place every day. It's wonderful to see you this morning. It's been great to spend time with you this week, and I'm just so happy to be able to address you this morning and talk about what I see coming in the next decade. Thank you also so much for the relationship that we have developed over the last 20 years. I have always been treated with respect and gratitude by this oil and gas industry, and what you have done for the state of North Dakota is just remarkable. I want to spend a little time talking about that. But of course, we know that we just came out of a pandemic year, a year like none of us had ever seen. Maybe some of our grandparents had seen this with the Spanish flu outbreak, but we'd never seen anything like this. And of course, when something crazy like that happens, I always have to consult my friend Ole. And so I asked Ole, what do you remember from the year of the pandemic? And he says, I remember the day I thought Lena was going to kill me. Whoa, that's a little weird, okay, during a pandemic. I said, what happened, Ole? He says, well, I come home at dark, and I was so drunk, and I come in the house, and Lena is sitting there, and she is so mad. She is madder than I've ever seen Lena before. And she says to me, Ole, where have you been? And I just told her, I've been out drinking beer and fishing with Sven. And she goes, I took off work all afternoon, and I came home to take care of you. Ole goes, why? Well, because I heard you call in this morning and you told your boss that you had COVID and you weren't going to be able to go to work. Ole says, no, Lena. I called the boss and I said, dude, I got a case of corona and I'm not going to make it to work today. So I hope you enjoyed your day of the pandemic. Let's talk a little bit about the Bakken. Let's start with where we are. We'll talk a little bit about where we've been, and then we'll talk about where I think we're going. This slide shows you the status as of the end of March in the state of North Dakota. That is an amazing map on the right-hand side of that slide. It shows the capital that you have invested. Hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into the state of North Dakota, paying sales tax, employing our North Dakota citizens, and making this a better place. As you can see up there, we ended the month of March with 16,000 producing wells, We have a lot of inactive wells still, over 2,000 inactive wells, over 600 duck wells waiting on completion, lots of permits. So permitting did not stop during the pandemic year. Y'all are sitting on about a 1-year inventory of permits, and I'm happy to report this morning, 18 rigs running. That's the most that we have had in over 12 months. And so we are gradually climbing back out of the enormous hole that pandemic handed us. Thank you. Thank you. Really excited to report that. Also excited to report, I'll give you a little preview of what's coming out tomorrow, but we're back above 1.1 million barrels a day at 1.13 million barrels a day and over 2.7 BCF of gas a day. So I really believe North Dakota is back, and thank you for that. The number that excites me is one of the last ones there, and that's the 12,095 wells. I've signed orders for another 12,095 wells to be drilled in those Bakken spacing units. So that's a little bit about where we are. Let's talk about where we've been, and this is a funny way to look at it. This is how a census taker looks at what you have done in North Dakota. I find this graph absolutely amazing. So I moved to North Dakota in 1980 during that oil boom. I grew up in South Dakota on a cattle ranch. I spent a couple years in Montana. I found out where the real oil patch was, and I moved to North Dakota in 1980. You can see that we had a boom and a bust in 1980. Anytime that bottom line goes red, we're in a bust. And so the 1980 boom brought people to North Dakota, but more people left at the end of that than came during the 80s boom and bust. That is not what began in 2005. So that line over there in 2005 corresponds with the Robert Hewer well in Divide County and the Partial 136 well over there in Mound Trail County. And that's the beginning of the Bakken trend, the Bakken development. From there on, you can see that we have never gone into negative population growth. Even last year, as we worked our way through the pandemic, and at the end, I got a nice little surprise for you to talk about how the state partnered in all of that. But even last year, during the worst of the pandemic, we never have gone into negative territory. We have grown this state in ways that have amazed everybody. Many of you will remember the poppers who said that we should take down all the fences, pull up all the streets, and run buffalo out here, and just let people kind of just wander through and watch the buffalo. It was going to be called the Buffalo Commons. You have proved them wrong. You have proved that North Dakota is a great place to live, a great place to raise children, a great place to work, a great place to invest your capital. And so you have created an environment where our young people stay. That time, those red parts of that line are times when we educated our young people and we sent them out of state. There was nothing here for them to do if they got an education here. So our biggest import, our biggest import was agriculture, okay? But our number 2 import was smart young people that went all around the world, but they left North Dakota. Today, that doesn't happen. They have opportunity here like no one has ever seen before. This is a remarkable graph. And you're going to look at that and say, but Lynn, you can't say that's because of the Bakken. There must be other things going on. So I took a look at what that looks like on a county-by-county basis. Take a look at that one, if you would. McKenzie County, 179% population growth. It nearly tripled. You got to hear from the former mayor of Watford City, a McKenzie County resident. There's some folks in a booth out there. You ought to stop and talk to them about what it's done for McKenzie County. The counties in red on this map had 10% or 9% or greater growth. The counties in yellow had some growth, 1 to 5%. And if you're blue or dark blue, you lost population. We want those guys to come along on the ride too. And you're saying, well, yeah, but there's some counties over there kind of in the middle and on the east. Those aren't Bakken counties. Well, I can tell you that government benefits from the Bakken oil and gas development, all right? So that's that stuff in the center. I can also tell you that Grand Forks and Fargo have benefited tremendously from the Bakken capital investment. What's that little one down there in the southeast corner? That looks like an outlier, doesn't it? That's where Bobcat is. That's where your bobcats are made and where they come from. So if you had a connection to the Bakken development, your population grew, your economy grew, you had a healthy, growing economy over the last decade. If you did not, if you could not connect to the Bakken development, then you didn't. Your population shrunk. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later and talk about some ways we may be able to bring some of those other folks in to this wonderful thing that's been going on. So let's talk, I wanted to show you this, just in case you still doubted it, all right? The map on the left is that population map by county. The map on the lower right is the Bakken geology. They look a lot alike, don't they? So the map on the right is how a geologist or an oil man sees the state of North Dakota. The map on the left is how somebody that builds hotels or invests in city infrastructure or retail sees the state of North Dakota. And it is absolutely an absolute fact that the growth over the last decade has been driven by you. Give yourself a round of applause. Thank you so much. So let's look to the future, the next decade. So we've just looked at what happened over the past decade, and we all understand and remember that, especially Ole. But let's look to the future. I want to talk about three things that I believe have to happen and will happen over the next decade to make North Dakota even better. The first one, and you've already looked at this map, so you've seen some of the numbers up there, but what I want to point out to you is if you total up the waiting on completion, permitted wells, and the already approved increased density wells, it's 14,448 wells. Guess what? It's more than the ones that you've already drilled and put on production. So more than half of the wells that are going to be drilled and producing in the Bakken are yet to be drilled. My point is that over the next decade, there is a lot of drilling and completion work left to do. We are far from done employing drilling rigs, employing frac crews, mining sand, moving water, and building well pads and constructing oil and gas wells across western North Dakota. So the first thing that has to happen over the next decade is to drill those 14,448 wells. That's the first thing, and that's going to keep all of us really active and busy and hopefully investing capital in the state of North Dakota. The second thing that has to happen is we have got to bring value-added natural gas home to our state. It's a dangerous thing to disagree with Kelsey Warren. Kelsey said, we're not going to do this in North Dakota because we can't put our plastic on the water. Well, we'll put it on the rail, all right? I'm going to disagree with Kelsey Warren. The state is all in on making this happen. So when you look at the graph on the right-hand side, what you can see is that we currently have the capacity to deal with our natural gas. And one of the numbers we're going to release tomorrow is you have gotten to 96% gas capture in the state of North Dakota. Give yourself another round of applause. Wow. I remember standing with the governor at a meeting and talking about the fact that you were only capturing 64% of your natural gas. And I remember people looking at the satellite pictures and comparing us to the city of Chicago in terms of the flares that were burning out there. Some of that was bad data, okay, but it's the way people looked at it anyway. And I recall him putting a challenge in front of you. He said, fix this so I don't have to. And so you stood up a gas capture task force, and I went to a lot of meetings, and we had a lot of conversations about how we were going to make that happen. And you invented the idea of gas capture plans, coming in with your permits, the idea of sitting down and meeting with the Industrial Commission on a semi-annual basis to make sure that the operators and the midstreamers were communicating, working on right-of-ways and all of that, and what a remarkable story that is. So we've gotten to the point where we can capture 96% of the gas at our current production. But you heard Justin talk yesterday, or I hope you heard Justin talk, and if you didn't, I hope you download his slides, because this graph is conservative. He's now re-looking at the Bakken and how it's really going to behave in terms of gas-oil ratio, and we're actually going to make more gas than what those three curves show on that graph. What are we going to do with all of that gas? Well, I trust that you want to turn that gas into cash. So there's some things that we can do. Enhanced oil recovery using that gas. Gathering and processing expansion, that's a given. We have to get to every well that is entirely physically possible to gather and process that gas. We are going to have a hard time exporting all that natural gas. So we have to figure out how to turn some of that gas into electrons. The world that we live in, the country that we live in, wants electrons. They're not so crazy about natural gas molecules. They don't understand them. That's why they don't want them. But if we can turn it into electrons, they know they want electrons because they know that they have to charge their iPhone. All right, that's the one known out there. And I know, I'm sorry, it's just reality. We are going to have to figure out how to store natural gas liquids, and we're working on that. We need to bring petrochemical processing to the state of North Dakota. That will bring a minimum $10 billion investment, a minimum 1,000 jobs to northwestern North Dakota. It will create decades of economic activity, and the secondary effects of that will be beyond what we have already seen. We do need to expand our natural gas liquid pipelines moving out of the state, and we need to expand our gas export pipelines. But there is a limit to how far we can go with those pipelines. And so we have to figure out those top 5 things in order to augment that. So number one thing, we have to be committed to drill those 14,448 wells. The number 2 thing is we have to be all in on bringing value-added natural gas to our state of North Dakota. And the 3rd thing, and I've already kind of touched on this, is we've got to crack the code on enhanced oil recovery. And so you've heard some presentations here at this conference, and if you hadn't, go and download the slides. But I've put 3 really shining examples up here of the work and the sweat that's going into cracking the code on enhanced oil recovery. We've got some young North Dakotans born and raised in North Dakota that have invented a surfactant process that recovers huge additional amounts of oil from wells that are down in the 20 to 40 barrel a day range. They've got hard proof now of wells on production and what happens within the first month or 2 after they put those wells back on production. They have the potential to increase the recovery from those wells, to double the recovery from those wells. The EERC has been studying, there's been 7 attempts at enhanced oil recovery in the Bakken, and some almost successes, some near misses, but nobody has cracked the code yet. And we have some wonderful grad students and professors at the University of North Dakota who are also working on different ways to do enhanced oil recovery in the Bakken and Three Forks. So the 3rd thing that I believe will happen and has to happen over this next decade is to crack the code on enhanced oil recovery. If we do those 3 things, and I believe we will do those 3 things, but it will not be easy, all right? I want you to look at this chart, and you can see on the left-hand side of this chart, the state of North Dakota is all in with you. We want to partner with you. We have programs like you cannot believe to invest in your research, to invest in your business, to help you commercialize it, to help you get rid of your carbon, to help you use that carbon to make more carbon. We are all in. We have set up the regulatory and tax and legislative and governing policies to make this state your partner. That's what the left-hand side of that shows. There's some folks in the rest of the country, not so much, all right? And so I've got a down arrow on the other side because you can see already in the first 120 days the federal policies that are pushing back. One of the ones that concerns me the most, and we're going to be talking about a resolution at the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, is this Clean Future Act. Give it a read sometime when you're really bored. It's 952 pages. But hidden in that 952 pages is every policy you can think of to make oil and gas disappear. Every policy you can think of is in that Clean Future Act. It is an unmitigated disaster. We will be all in on helping you resist that and overcome that. Some good news is our own legislators in Washington, D.C. have sponsored the Revive Economic Growth and Reclaim Orphan Wells Act. And that's going to allow us to continue the program that we invented here of making sure that North Dakota is not left with a legacy of orphan wells when all is said and done. It's a program that's going to offer up to $25 million a year to states like North Dakota from the Department of Energy through the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission to bring states like Pennsylvania and Texas to the place where North Dakota is, where you can count the orphan wells in 3 digits or 2 digits, not in 7 digits, all right? And so that's really great. And we heard such good news about the Dakota Access Pipeline yesterday. I could just feel such a sigh of relief in this room when Mr. Warren made the statement that he made about the Dakota Access Pipeline. But, so remember this, on the left-hand side, the state wants to be your partner. If you have an idea, if you want to invest capital, if you want to make North Dakota a better place, give us a call. We will find somebody for you to talk to about a research program, about a grant, about partnering, about sharing, about loaning you money to make that happen. And I promise you, we will stand alongside of you to resist all of that nonsense on the right-hand side of that graph. Thank you. So I hope that when we talk 10 years from now, that the 10-year census looks like this, that not only are our core Bakken counties seeing double and triple digit economic growth and population growth, but we'll bring some of these guys around the edges in too. We talked about the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority, and that should bring that county right in the center of the state back up and participating with us as a partner of providing carbon dioxide to the oil and gas industry for enhanced oil recovery. But I believe 10 years from now, we can look at a census map and see something like this. And so what will that look like when we look at it on a statewide basis? It's going to look like this. We're going to double down on what we did over the last 10 years. I want to finish and leave you with these words, because I said it's not going to be easy. This is one of the most inspiring things that was ever said to the American people. In September of 1962, John F. Kennedy said this about going to the moon. And you heard the governor say, yes, hey, this challenge I'm putting in front of you is not a moonshot. Well, the challenge I've put in front of you this morning is kind of a moonshot. But here's what he had to say, and we'll read it slowly together and let it sink in. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, okay? So the 3 things I've put in front of you, we're not going to do them because they're easy. We're going to do them because they're awesome, all right? But because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one that we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too. That's my challenge to you today for the next 10 years. We can do this together if we will be partners. Thank you so much. This is how you find us if you have an idea. Thank you. I have one more thing I want to share with you, because the pandemic was incredibly hard for this state and for your industry. And so, kind of proving the point that I made earlier, that the state of North Dakota is your partner in good times and bad, we have a video that we want to show you about how we came alongside your oil and gas industry to help you through the worst year that your industry had ever experienced in the state of North Dakota.
2020 was a challenging year for us. It actually started out in January and February, fairly good months. Well, then March hit, and the pandemic caused the oil price to collapse. And then we basically were at a standstill.
It was devastating, and to a level that we have never seen before. You know, what did companies do? Well, we saw immediately as they started pulling everything in. They dropped the drilling rigs. We came to about March 8th of 2020. Saudi Arabia and Russia began their price war about curtailing production. Just absolutely decimated this industry, the oil and gas industry.
When March hits and you come to a screaming halt, it's sleepless nights, wondering what you're going to do next and how long is it going to last.
What happened is a lot of people lost their jobs. Good, solid, long-term workforce was put out of business.
The whole world was affected by it, so obviously there were also no jobs and, you know, people getting laid off. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be working.
Eventually, you know, the CARES Act money comes, and our Governor Burgum, working with state officials, decided one of the allocations of that money would be to the North Dakota Industrial Commission and our director, DMR director, Lynn Helms, to take care of a long-standing problem, and that is capping and a permanent abandon to wells that have been abandoned out in the field.
I was in control of the whole project, so I had to hire all the services, starting from the workover rigs, cement companies, roustabouts, water trucks, anything to do with plugging the wells.
We had 3 to 4 rigs going, being that it was such a tight deadline that, you know, we really had to make sure everything was going efficiently. If I had one guy in Burke County, I had to make sure that all the wells he was going to stays in Burke County, because there's no point having all these rigs travel back and forth.
One of the criteria they wanted set up was that we had to use all North Dakota companies that had a home base in North Dakota. Wanted to make sure this money recirculated in North Dakota, so if this thing came back, they had people to work. You know, that was the big thing with this CARES Act money. We wanted to save the services, save this experience. It kept that experience in the state instead of letting these guys leave because they didn't have a job. Oil's kind of come back. Now we've got experienced people still working on these wells instead of having to retrain people, and the cost of retraining these people is astronomical.
That's a lot of invoices, processing that and approving, making sure that that is exactly what we did, and then a fast turnaround, sending that to the state so then we can pay these vendors right away. Because that was one of the goal here is to keep these North Dakota businesses in business.
It was perfect timing to have something like this that took care of a problem for the state, put a lot of good people to work, and keep them around for when the industry got back on its feet.
The roustabouts, hauler rods, and tubing, we sold it to all the landowners. I sold all the pumping units to one company. And then when it was done, we issued a check to the state for over $250,000.
Fast forward to 2021, oil prices rebounded. There's some optimism in the industry. Companies are starting to put wells back online. Projects are starting up again. So thanks to the P&A project, we were able to keep 100% of our staff on. It helped everyone a lot and took away the sleepless nights. It was the best project I've been involved in, for sure.
We ended up plugging 280 wells. We reclaimed 143 wells, plus 640 acres of land we put back into production. We reclaimed a 50-mile abandoned pipeline, saved about $1 million on costs.
Thank you for all you have done for this state that I love so much. Keep up the good work. Have a great morning.
Thank you, Lynn, for your presentation, and thank you also for taking the leadership on the plugging program. It sort of became a model for other states in the country. Our next guest is Chris Kendall. Chris is a CEO and member of the board of directors at Denbury, Inc. Chris joined Denbury as Chief Operating Officer in September of 2015 and was named President in October of 2016. He was appointed to his current role as Director and CEO effective July 1, 2017. Prior to joining Denbury, Chris was with Noble Energy. Please help me give Chris a warm welcome.
Thank you, Lawrence. Well, thank you, Lawrence. And, listening to Lynn speak, I think, is just a great start to our presentation here. I'm going to talk about Denbury, and I hope many of you know Denbury. I think many of you may not, and I'm looking forward to sharing our story with you. But listening to Lynn talk about the opportunities in North Dakota, specifically around enhanced oil recovery, that's something very near and dear to our heart, and you'll see that as we go through the upcoming slides here. We're excited about EOR. We've got a lot going on right here in North Dakota that I think is important. And what I'd like to do is talk about that, and then maybe talk about some bigger things that I see as opportunities right along the lines of what Lynn was talking about. So first, let's take a look at Denbury. And this slide, we show a few things, but what I'd want you to focus on is first, just where we are. We have two key operating regions, the Gulf Coast, kind of spanning from Mississippi, Louisiana, and on into Texas. That's where Denbury started. But our new growth area, where we've entered within the last decade, around 2010, is in the Rockies. And you'll see us here in Wyoming, Montana, and in North Dakota, just in this great Cedar Creek anticline field that crosses the border from Montana into North Dakota. And that's a lot of our focus, and it's an exciting thing to be looking at, and we'll talk about that. Our focus as a company has been primarily on enhanced oil recovery. Enhanced oil recovery using carbon dioxide. And that's a technique that started years ago when we had this thought that peak oil was a real issue in terms of supply and that there would never be enough oil in the world. And maybe that's shifted some, but the technique is still important. And it's important now for some different reasons. It does things with carbon dioxide that the world needs, and we think it opens up some great opportunities for our industry. And I'll tell you about that in a few slides. The company's producing about 50,000 barrels a day, split between these two regions. And what we're looking to do is grow this company, grow the business right here in this Rocky Mountain region, right here in North Dakota. As a CO2 EOR-focused company, our assets are very aligned with that. And so as you look at these two maps, and you'll see some pipelines connecting our fields that are shown in those green drops. Well, those pipelines, they're not oil pipelines, they're not natural gas pipelines, they're CO2 pipelines. We have over 1,000 miles of CO2 pipelines across these two regions, and we're building more even this year, and I'll tell you about that. So it's hard for me to talk about the company and what we do without starting with safety. Safety, and I hope it's the same with all of you, is a foundation of what we're all about. I believe, that the best business that we can have is one that is safe. And I don't mean just keeping Denbury's employees safe, I mean keeping everybody that touches our business safe. If it is a contractor that's doing work for us, if it's a vendor who's setting foot on our property, we want to look out for all of our brothers and sisters, just like we'd look out for our own family. And we've been doing a great job of that. I was honored a couple years ago for Denbury to receive the Excellence in Safety Award from the North Dakota Petroleum Council for this Zero by Choice program that we had put together, really focused on just driving a culture that better safety is not acceptable. We need to be focused on an incident-free workplace. And I'm happy to say that we have been progressing steadily and setting records on a yearly basis on our safety performance, and we truly see that in the culture of the company. Very excited about that, and we're on track to do even better this year. So many of you, I'm sure, know a lot about CO2 enhanced oil recovery. I'm sure most of you know more than I know about it, but I wanted to just touch on it a bit because I think that there might be some in the audience who don't know about it, at least at this level, that I want to share with you. What's interesting is that we use carbon dioxide, and at the right reservoir conditions, we are able to get the carbon dioxide to act as a solvent running through a depleted oil field. And as you know, getting the oil out of the rock is a process that is not easy. Primary recovery is often in the neighborhood of 20% of the oil that's in place. So we leave 80% of the oil there. We keep working it, often moving to water floods in these conventional reservoirs, but again, you're really in that 20% range. Still, you have 60% of the oil left in the ground. And that's where the opportunity for enhanced oil recovery comes in. Using that property of carbon dioxide, we're able, on average, to get in that same neighborhood as either primary or secondary recovery will gather, and we can do that with a couple of important caveats that go along with it. Number one, we're using the same footprint. We are working within fields that have already been developed, and we have communities that have been built around it. We're using the disturbed land that's already been disturbed. It's a very friendly practice from a footprint standpoint. Importantly, though, when we use carbon dioxide to extract oil in this manner, essentially 100% of the carbon dioxide that we ever use stays in the ground. And that's not commonly known. You think about the CO2 that we use, we push it through a reservoir, it touches oil, it comes out in a combination with the oil, we separate it, and we put it back in the reservoir. And so we're going through that cycle, but ultimately, nearly 100% of that CO2 stays permanently in the ground. And so in a world where we're really looking at what do we do with carbon dioxide, this is a great solution. And I'm going to talk some more about that going forward. So you've probably heard a lot about carbon capture, use, and storage, CCUS. It's in the news every day. It's something that, honestly, I'd say a year ago, we thought about quite a bit, but you certainly didn't hear it the way you hear it today. And the reason I want to spend a little bit of time touching on this today is because I think that carbon capture, use, and storage and enhanced oil recovery is a subset of that. It's a use of CO2 that leaves the CO2 in the rock. But I think this is an opportunity that is different. It lets us use our technology, our assets, our people that have grown up working through oil and gas. We can use those same skills to put CO2 in the ground. And so what we're doing with CCUS, we have EOR, but with government policy, and there's a policy that's been put in place, it's called the 45Q tax credit, actually provides a credit for CO2 that's captured, transported, and permanently put underground. And today it's $50 a ton. And so there's a business that can be built around that, and it can use the same skills that we have right here in this industry. And so to me, when I think about the challenges that we face, we have CCUS that will need to be used to take more CO2 out of the air. And just to put that in perspective, the IEA, one of the world's foremost authorities on energy, when they estimate the tools that are available to us to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, certainly their top two are wind and solar. But you might be surprised to know that the number 3 tool is CCUS. In fact, they estimate that by 2040, we'll need to have used CCUS to put 11 billion tons of CO2 underground. So there's a great opportunity here, and with the geology that we have right here in North Dakota and the expertise that we have, I think there's an unbelievable opportunity. So the next few slides, what I'd like to do is turn to Denbury specifically. The opportunity that I just spoke of is fabulous, but I want to share with you what we're doing right now and why it matters right here in North Dakota. So this is a close-up map that looks in a little more detail at our Rocky Mountain region. The Rocky Mountain region spans, like I mentioned, from Wyoming into Montana and then right here into North Dakota, with the southern extent of the Cedar Creek Anticline and our Cedar Hills South field. And what you'll see on this, essentially, it's a CO2 business. So we take our CO2 off of Exxon's plant down in southwestern Wyoming at Chute Creek. The CO2 runs through a pipeline system. Right now, it's primarily being used in our Bell Creek field, which is on the Montana-Wyoming border. But what we're particularly excited about right now is this year, we've budgeted around $150 million in our 2021 budget to build a 105-mile CO2 pipeline that will run from that Bell Creek field right into the Cedar Creek Anticline field, and then a lateral beyond that will run into North Dakota and enable us to initiate a flood a CO2 flood in that Cedar Creek Anticline field. So I'll show you some details on that, but I just wanted to give you kind of the lay of the land of what we're doing here. This project, we expect to start getting this pipeline in the ground beginning next month. So this is a real pipeline project. Honestly, in a world that, as we've heard, is not that easy to get pipeline projects going, but this is permitted and it's ready to go. Before I come off of this slide, I'd also mention just a minor acquisition that Denbury had made in the first quarter of this year with the Beaver Creek and Big Sand Draw fields there more in central Wyoming. And that's an asset that we acquired in a tough time in the industry, but they make a lot of sense for us, as I'm sure you can see just from looking at the slide here. Next two slides, I want to really show you what Cedar Creek Anticline project looks like. To us, we're thrilled to be able to start a brand new enhanced oil recovery project right here in North Dakota and on into Montana as well. If you look at Cedar Creek Anticline, many of you know that and many of you worked there, but the anticline itself is an incredible structure. The map I'm showing here runs about 90 miles from north to south, so it's very extensive. And as such, we need to break it into phases when we're going to develop it. And so our initial phase is this phase one that catches two key fields: the Cedar Hills South field, right here in North Dakota, and East Lookout Butte field, just on the other side of the border. So our plan is to bring this pipeline in, and we'll have it installed by the end of this year, and we'll start moving CO2 into those two fields in the early part of next year, and we'll start to see production come up within about a year and a half or so after we start injection. So it's a very exciting project, and it's one that can continue to build as we go forward. We will bring CO2 and we'll expand ultimately, I think, throughout the entire field that you see here on this slide. Very exciting. It's also exciting just from the potential that we see here. So much oil that is still in place along the lines of what I showed earlier that we think we can ultimately recover. In fact, we think the amount that we can ultimately recover is greater than the total proved reserves that the company has today. So here I want to show you something that I think is very surprising about enhanced oil recovery. And as I mentioned earlier, the CO2 stays in the ground. When we take CO2 from captured industrial sources and put that in the ground, it does an amazing thing for the balance of carbon dioxide through the whole course of your project. Now for us in the oil and gas industry, we think about the emissions associated with our business, right? And we have the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and those are direct and indirect. And those are pretty easy to think about. It's hard for us in oil and gas to talk about emissions without talking about Scope 3 emissions. And Scope 3 emissions are those that come from the combustion of the products that we produce. And honestly, in a lot of cases, it's why folks don't like us as much, is because they look at that and they see that as a label on all of us. But what I want to show you here is it's not necessarily the case. When we use captured CO2 in EOR, we're offsetting those emissions. And we've shown specifically in the graph on the lower left-hand side of this slide how that works out for our phase 1 and phase 2 of this project right here in North Dakota and in Montana. So the combination of all these emissions 77 million tons for phases 1 and 2. Now, I would say 80 to 90% of that is Scope 3 associated with that combustion of our produced product. But the CO2 that's being captured from an industrial source that's being injected is greater than the amount of emissions. So if you just let that soak in for a minute, it's something that is a little bit counterintuitive, but we need to use a lot of CO2 to get a barrel of oil out of the ground. And in fact, when we look at that whole balance, for this project specifically, we have a negative 8 million tons over the life of those phases 1 and 2 of this project. And when I just divide that out on a per barrel basis, that means that for every barrel that we produce, we're permanently reducing CO2 over all that scope by about 130 pounds. So every barrel is reducing about 130 pounds of CO2. And we're very excited about that. When we look at Denbury as a whole, we use a combination of industrial source CO2 and natural CO2. Right now, about 25% of our production comes from industrial source CO2. And on average, this number is even greater for us, just with the nature of the different reservoirs that we're putting CO2 in. And so what we want to do is we want to continue to replace that natural CO2 with industrial CO2. That industrial CO2 is going to be incented by these government policies that are in place to capture and put it away. And then we see the company moving even greater towards a neutrality point on overall emissions, which is a pretty hard thing to do for an energy company here. A couple other details before I leave this slide I want to share with you are the production. What I love about EOR fields, and many of you would see this, is they last a very long time. It's a process that, in this case, we expect will keep this field running for many decades into the future. We have a heavy capital investment this year, primarily associated with the pipeline that we'll be putting in, but from that point on, we can continue to feed capital at a lower level and to continue to develop that field and expand it as we go. And it'll work within cash flow, certainly at today's prices, but honestly, even at prices that are much lower than what we see here today. So very exciting time for Denbury, very exciting project that we're working on. And like I said, we're particularly excited about what it means to North Dakota. What I'd also like to share is as we thought about bringing this pipeline up to North Dakota, we had a certain need for the field, and we calculated that and came up with a pipeline size that we think works quite well. But then we thought about it a little more. And I go back to even what Lynn was saying just a few minutes ago about the possibilities for EOR in North Dakota. And we think about the whole Bakken and what's the technical work that's being done there and what those possibilities are as well. It's very exciting, and we saw the potential for something bigger. And so we, early in the design here, we said, we need a 12-inch pipeline to get the CO2 for the field. Let's upsize the pipeline and make sure we have sufficient extra capacity to let other exciting things happen here in North Dakota. And so it's a 16-inch pipeline, and instead of having a limit on the order of 180 or 200 million cubic feet of CO2 a day, with the right provisions, we can get the 16-inch line up to 500 million cubic feet a day or so. So a lot of extra capacity is there, and it's exciting to think about just what we can do with all of that. I think there's an exciting future that can go in many different directions, whether it's EOR in other parts of North Dakota, or whether it's CCUS, where we're taking captured CO2 off of power plants or other industrial sources and putting it permanently underground, using the skills and assets that the industry already has in place here. Very exciting. So wrapping up, I just want to highlight a few things that I'd want you to take away about Denbury. Number one, in an industry that is very diverse and you run into a lot of different basins, different areas of focus, I think you'll find that Denbury has a unique focus with 60% of our production coming from enhanced oil recovery and a focus on building that and building into CCUS, whether it is with EOR or otherwise. We think our skills can get us there. And those skills were developed over 20 years of running EOR fields. Through all these ups and downs that we've seen since the turn of the century, this company has become stronger and better at working with CO2. And today's world, that's essential. There's a lot of talk about infrastructure and what's needed to make CCUS happen in a bigger way. And right here today, Denbury has 1,000 miles of CO2 pipelines in the ground between our two regions, and we're building another 105 miles right here this year. So we're very excited about the infrastructure that we have. We have set a goal as a company by the end of this decade to be negative on a Scope 3 emissions basis. And the way we'll do that is, honestly, it's by doing more of what we're already doing. We think we can get there. And then finally, we're a company that has the financial strength and flexibility and the focus to get us there. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Our next speaker is here to present on midstream operations. Bob Phillips currently serves as Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Crestwood Equity Partners, LP, which he founded in October of 2010. Mr. Phillips has more than 42 years of experience in the energy industry. He previously served as President, Chief Executive Officer of Enterprise Products Partnership, LP, and prior to that, he served as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Gulf Terra Energy Partners, LP, and prior to that, he was the Chief Executive Officer of East Tex Energy, Inc. Please help me welcome Bob Phillips.
Thanks, Lawrence, and good morning to everybody. It's a little bit bigger crowd than I expected on the third day of a conference in Bismarck, but it means you weren't too rowdy last night around town. That's good. I do understand that they ran out of wings at the local pub, which is probably a good thing for the economy. We were staying at the Hampton Inn and had a delightful chat with a lady that runs it. She's understaffed, but she's excited. She's done more business in the last 3 days than she did all of last month, so that's a good sign for the local economy. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to Ron Ness and the entire team for putting on a great conference, a revival, if you will, of the Bakken. Last year was a tough year on everybody, and I'm really glad to see that people are back. There's a spring in our step. We're optimistic about the future and really optimistic about the Bakken. Ron asked me to give the midstream perspective. You know, we're all in this together. It's a wellhead to burner tip business to make the Bakken a great shale play in America. It's very competitive out there for capital allocation. Many of our producer customers that have already given speeches over the last couple of days constantly talk about how challenging it is to get capital allocated. Many of you are just Bakken players, and as a result, this is where you make your money. This is where you live, and this is where you work, and so your dollars stay here in North Dakota. But many of the operators are large-scale operators that have other choices to drill. So part of the central theme that I guess I'll be talking about for the next few minutes is how we work together as a great supply chain to make sure that the hydrocarbon products that we produce here in the Bakken are not only competitive, but they get to market, and they get to market quickly with good access. And then we take the cash that we make from all this capital investment and redeploy here into the local community. So it's an exciting time. We spent some quality time with Governor Burgum and Chairman Fox of the MHA yesterday. Great to see them working together, collaborating on how we can improve things here in North Dakota throughout the industry. It's a great partnership. You guys are very lucky as an industry to have Doug Burgum providing real leadership here. He and the team are fabulous. They do a great job for the industry. They make it easy on us because they're businessmen too. So congratulations to them and the entire team that the state and the commitment that they make to the oil and gas industry. You know, I walked in when Lynn was giving his speech, and I'm reminded every time I see Lynn that I think of myself as a Bakken cheerleader, but Lynn is actually a Bakken ambassador. So I only hope that we can stay in the business long enough to elevate our knowledge of the Bakken and our ability to influence capital allocation up to this basin as well as he does. He's a fabulous resource for the industry. I marvel at the amount of data that he and his team have and how well they use it, and the leadership that they provide in trying to lead the industry towards the next big thing. And I'm not surprised that enhanced oil recovery is beginning to come up in the conversation. I was impressed by the fact that he thought there's 16,000 wells yet to be drilled in this basin, and that's far more than a decade of inventory. So really pleased about that. Let me give you my bona fides real quickly. I think Lawrence asked me if I was the Crestwood E&P company, and I said, no, I'm not. Crestwood's a midstream company, and we're really pleased and proud to be here. I do think of myself as a Bakken cheerleader. We've been here since 2012. We've invested over $2 billion in midstream infrastructure. We have a fabulous workforce here, all native North Dakotans. They're really plugged into the community. They have deep roots, and we really invest in the community as much as possible, so I really appreciate my team. Having said that, Crestwood is a public company like a lot of the companies up here, and so we're constantly dealing with investors and investors' perspective about the Bakken. Now, none of us have made the commitment to this basin that Harold Hammond Continental have, and so he's the real ambassador for the industry. And I think as his view of the basin and our industry continues to improve, then we should all feel that great sense of confidence that we're past all the pain and suffering of last year and we're headed towards better times. Certainly from a Crestwood perspective, this is the most important asset that we have in our portfolio. We operate the Arrow gathering system on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, the Bearten processing complex, and the Colt Hub, which is the leading crude by rail facility in the basin. And so we provide a wide range of midstream services, as do other midstream companies, and you know the names of the companies that have been here for the last decade and invested money like we have. My perspective is a little bit different, though. I get to see all the basins because we've got assets from the Marcellus to the Delaware Permian to the Bakken to the Powder River Basin to the Barnett and around the country. And so we get to take a hard look at the basin on a daily basis. And let me tell you, this is a great basin to do business. It's a low-cost basin. It's essential to the U.S. being able to produce 11 to 12 million barrels a day, which we know is critical to America's security and American energy independence. This is absolutely a vital basin, and so we should treat it as such. I will tell you that we think the U.S. oil and gas fundamentals are improving. Activity levels are increasing, not just here slowly, but in all the other major basins that are oil-weighted. Investors are coming back to the sector. Talk a little bit about that. That's a positive thing because we've largely lost investment in oil and gas, both upstream, midstream, and downstream. But we've got to maintain our capital discipline to be able to keep the investors coming back and make this an attractive investment opportunity as we move forward. There's certainly challenges with the Biden administration, the wholesale change in regulatory oversight. We'll talk about some of that, but we'll move forward. The one thing that I'll probably hammer home more than anything else is the importance of ESG competitiveness to keep the Bakken a competitive basin with other basins out there. Now, all the speakers, as I've observed them, have had different forms of ESG policies and practices, but we as an industry need to embrace this on a formal and institutional level and really put out to our investors and to the market and to regulators all the things that we're doing from an environmental, a social, and a governance standpoint to improve their view of our industry, and that's the real reason for doing that. And we've got to work together as an industry from the wellhead to the burner tip. It's no more producers and then gathering companies and then processing companies and then the pipelines take it away. We've all got to work together to be able to do that. Where we start at Crestwood is around customer service. And if my guys have gotten anything right at all, they absolutely provide some of the best customer service of any gatherer or processor in the business. I might just direct you to some of the recent recognition that we've had for a number of years in a row now. One of the many different research firms out there, Energy Point Research, listed Crestwood as #1 in gas transportation. That's our Marcellus business. We move about 3 BCF a day of gas up there, critical gas transportation storage infrastructure to feed into the Northeast utility market. That's a critical piece of business, and we consistently rank #1 there. Service and professionalism is our marketing, supply, and logistics business. That's our trucks, our rail, our marketing guys, the guys that move product here in Bakken, not just through the gathering line, but to get it to market at a high netback. We have been rated again #1 in the Bakken Dakotas for gathering services, and I'm really proud of that. And our Texas intrastate business has done quite well in the last year or two also. Quick look at Crestwood. Lawrence asked me if I was the Crestwood E&P company. I said, no, I'm the Crestwood Midstream company. He said, oh, that's funny. There's already a company here named Crestwood. I said, no, Lawrence. I named this company after the street that I live on, so I know this is the real Crestwood. Crestwood's a company that we started 10 years ago in 2010. We've been buying and building assets across the United States. As you can see, we operate in the Delaware and the Barnett in Texas and in the Powder River Basin. It's a big area for us. In the Northeast Marcellus, both in the rich gas play and the dry gas play. But our most important asset in our portfolio is here in the Bakken. And that's why I'm here. We spend a lot of time here. We spend a lot of money. And we will continue to be a long-term player in the Bakken for years. As we move forward, let's talk a little bit about our assets and where we are as a midstream company and where the entire midstream industry is. You know, on the left is just a list of the things that we do and who we do it with. We're blessed to have great partners on the system, our producers, Devon WPX, XTO, Interplus, Rimrock, Shale, and just recently Oasis bought the old QEP acreage out. We couldn't be more happy with the partnership that we have with those producers. It's important that we communicate. We can't overbuild or underbuild. We need to right time build to make sure there's capacity available at the wellhead for all the products. We move gas, gas liquids, crude, and water. So we have a 3-phase gathering system, and that enables us to be able to work with our producers to make sure we have adequate compression, adequate pipeline, we can get it to the processing plant, adequate capacity in the processing plant, and then downstream into the market. We use our MSL logistics business to make sure that our customers get their production marketed to the highest value, highest netback market. The challenge for all of us in the midstream, and this is really kind of across the entire industry, is do we have enough capacity to handle the next big step up in production? So if you look at the graphs on the right, probably a little difficult from the back of the room, but top left is crude gathering. You can see our gathering capacity is up 90% in the last 4 years. We've spent over $600 million just in the last 4 years on this system and the processing plants to ensure that our producers have adequate capacity to develop their acreage on the FBIR. On the top right is water gathering. We've got plenty of capacity there. Importantly, we spent $120 million over the last 4 years replacing our fiber spar water system because of the leak history that it had from the previous owner of the business and the overall construction that we found when we bought the business back in 2013. So a big improvement not only in water capacity, but also water quality. We're starting to go to reuse, and we're beginning to work with our producers to see how we can be more helpful in managing their business as well. Gas gathering is where the big challenge it is, not only gathering, but processing and then downstream capacity in Northern Border. We're all going to have to work together to ensure that we have adequate gas gathering, processing, and downstream capacity. And then processing, a big jump there. We historically offloaded our gas to other companies for processing. We started our own processing business 4 years ago, and so we're handling all that in the value chain. When we think about great customer service, we think about an operational focus that manages the business on a day-to-day basis. We're constantly worried about and talking about pressure management. We're constantly debottlenecking local constraints on the system, adding another compressor here, looping a line there, working with our producers. The way we do that is through total transparency and communication with our customers about their development plan. As you can see, with 6 different major producers on the reservation, you know, they're oftentimes all drilling and completing at the same time. Oftentimes, maybe it's staggered a little bit. So we work hand in hand with our producer customers to make sure that we have adequate capacity, eliminating flaring, reducing the number of trucks on the road, and minimizing our footprint is absolutely a collective goal that we have to get better at as an industry and as we go forward. So our 2 big assets are the Colt Hub, located over by Williston. It's the largest crude by rail loading facility in the industry. At its peak, we were doing 160,000 barrels a day before DAPL. Now we run about 50 to 70,000 barrels a day. It is a very important part of our business and allows us to make sure that all of our producer customers' barrels flow. If they can't get it into a pipe downstream of the Arrow system, we can truck it over to Colt and get it out to market there. You'd be surprised at how positive the netbacks are in the rail market today. I think we all experienced that last year when there was a possibility of a DAPL shutdown. Producers fanned out, started moving barrels into other pipelines, earning long-term capacity, moving barrels back to rail again, and I think they were quite satisfied with the overall netback. So there's a real integrated system there for us. The crown jewel of our Bakken assets, though, is the Arrow gathering system, which is located on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. And as I pointed out, we are a 3-product system, which allows us to very, very carefully and on an optimized basis make sure that we've got room for all of our producers' products while we are reducing our environmental footprint. So really proud about how those 2 assets have developed over the years, how they're interconnected, and how great a job we do not only at the wellhead to manage pressure and optimize facilities and capacity given the different development plans that our customers have out there, but how we get their production to market with the greatest flow assurance and the highest possible netback. That's the goal of every midstream company. Going forward, Crestwood has been a leader in the industry across the midstream as a sustainability company. Now, again, we all talk about great safety performance. We've been giving back to the community for years. This is a very charitable industry. What we've never done, though, is we've never institutionalized all that data so that investors and regulators can compare from company to company what their real ESG or sustainability program is. I started back in 2018. We hired a team. We started developing our own ESG metrics. We then started talking to our fellow midstream companies about how they would do it. Because I'm on the board of directors of the Energy Infrastructure Council, which is the largest pipeline trade association, and I chair the ESG subcommittee, we got the entire industry to work together to build a template to establish for investors, for rating agencies, and all the capital providers in the industry. Importantly, banks care about this now. Every bank has an ESG department, and we get graded when we go back to the bank to renew our credit facility. We get graded when we go to the capital markets to sell equity or debt on ESG. So we have been pushing on a sustainability program for 3 years. We will file our 3rd sustainability report in June of this year for last year. And it is a absolutely critical part of the industry if you're going to be a producer or a player, a midstream player in this business. Just a quick timeline to give you a sense for how all this works. It's not just hiring somebody or some consultant that knows how to calculate your emissions and then making a filing somewhere. It's a process, and it's a long-term process, and it's here to stay. And the reason why is because everybody's watching our industry. So as we grow as a company, as midstream goes as an industry, as oil and gas in general continues to grow, we all have to follow the same path. We have to join environmental partnerships, whether it's a formal affiliation or just a group of companies. We have to get rated by the rating agencies, MSCI, Sustainalytics, Bloomberg. We have to work hard at the local level to get certifications for land and biodiversity measures. All these things we're doing, the industry needs to do it across the entire industry. Social injustice is a big issue in our industry. And again, bankers and the capital markets and regulators are watching us. So all this is important. It's an ongoing process. We'll continue to build on it. I guess just quickly on the Bakken, we're really excited about where the Bakken is right now. Things are clearly improving. There is a long runway of inventory here. We've got 12,000 inventory locations. Lynn has 16. He's the expert. 16,000 well locations is a long time, guys. At current rig rates, it's kind of forever for anybody in this room. For the guys like me that have been around for a long time, we can see 3 or 4 years down the road, we can see a pickup in rig rates, we can see an increase in volumes. We know that the infrastructure is there to get that oil and that gas to market, but really the Bakken is in great shape. And the reason why is because it's great rock. I'm sure many of you have seen these slides which identify the different acreage into Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4. If you haven't, it's quite a study. It's worth a look. But at $60 a barrel and $2.75 gas price, all 4 tiers are economic in this basin, and they will get drilled eventually. We're starting to see M&A activity inside the basin and outside the basin. That's a good thing. That means capital's coming back after COVID, and people are agreeing on deals, are agreeing on acreage values. Most importantly, we know that as a midstream industry, we've got to stay ahead of this to continue to build capacity to make sure that the economics can work for our producers at current prices. Now, this is a really difficult slide to see from the back of the room, but at the top, it's just a quick listing of crude prices the way we think about Bakken crude. And Bakken is in the middle. This was from a couple of days ago. I'm sorry I didn't update it, but it's up $1.50 from there. All these prices up $1.50. The Bakken is in the middle. Spot price $63. You can sell the rest of Cal 21 if you want to hedge it at 61.5. And you can sell Cal 22 right now. That number yesterday morning was 58.75. So you can almost sell Cal 22 for $60. All these acreage positions are economic at $60 Cal 22. Then when you look across the chart with the NYMEX on the left, that's basically the WTI. Brent is essentially the European number, Bakken in the middle, Guernsey's the Powder River, Midland is the Delaware, and USGC is the Gulf Coast. Bakken's pretty darn competitive across all those basins. So the story that we hear from our major friends that have choices in the Delaware or the Haynesville or the Eagle Ford or the Bakken, we're competitive from a price standpoint. When you look down below and you compare the spot price to the futures price, the basis differential is surprisingly small, a couple of bucks. That's not a bad basis differential since we've had DAPL hanging over our heads for almost a year now, right? So as we get more confidence about DAPL that it's going to stay in business, basis tightens, netbacks improve, and we'll see more rig activity because of that. Compare that to the bottom, and it's really hard to see, but the green boxes are Bakken Tier 1 on the far left, and that break even is $30. We can drill and make money at $30. That shows the quality of the rock here in the Bakken. And again, as a cheerleader or an ambassador, I am constantly showing this to my investors. Our customers do have good economics. They have ample takeaway. This is a basin that has longevity to it. We will continue to be there for a long period of time. In fact, the 4 green boxes are the 4 tiers of most of the acreage, and it's all economic at current prices, and producers can hedge forward to lock those prices in. Now we go to infrastructure, and that's always the challenge. It's always been the challenge here, right? But if you add it all up, we've got over 2.5 million barrels a day of oil takeaway capacity when you count rail. And rail was essential 7 or 8 years ago, and it was essential last year during the COVID. And if anything ever happens to DAPL or any of the other pipelines, it's going to be essential. So we've got plenty of takeaway capacity, but the industry needs to continue to work together and collaborate. When you pull it all together, again, I'm the cheerleader for Bakken when I go on CNBC or Fox or Bloomberg or talk to the FERC commissioners like I did last month. We love the Bakken. The Bakken's strong. It's getting stronger. We've seen a lot of M&A activity recently at pretty decent prices, which indicates to us that capital's coming back and investors are actually getting really excited about the Bakken again. We expect, like Lynn did, we expect production to grow this year and next. So what do we do as an industry to keep this good thing going? We've got to have capital discipline. For the first time in history, the Midstream is free cash flow positive. We stopped borrowing money like a drunken sailor, and we're now free cash flow positive. And we're reinvesting in our assets and reinvesting in our communities. And we're working hand in hand with our producer customers to make sure that everybody makes money and we're all free cash flow positive, because there is no more access to the public markets for oil and gas today. It may come back if we earn their respect, if we continue to generate good returns for our investors, that money will come back. The chart on the right shows energy compared to all the other major economic sectors over the last, year to date. Energy's up 35%, probably up a little bit more after the last couple of days. All positive. Investors are starting to look at our industry again, and we are improving the ability to raise capital. Now, let me just wrap up quickly with a couple of really important thoughts on a local level about ESG and why it's important. For us to maintain the Bakken as a great basin over a long period of time, we've got to smooth out the cycles. We've got to invest when we can and be prepared to develop production and move it to market, but do that in a way that is healthy to the environment, healthy to our local communities, healthy to our investors, and transparent all along the way. And so that's why we keep pounding the table about ESG initiatives. That's the long-term future. Gas capture is the most important one here in the Bakken. It is more important here than it is anywhere else, and that includes the Delaware. And we've got a big operation down there, and literally you can read a newspaper at night with the amount of flaring that goes on there. But we have done it here, and I congratulate all of you for working together. Lynn said it, Governor said it yesterday. Even Chairman Fox on the reservation admitted we have met our gas capture goals. At Crestwood, we're below 10%. We're at 9%, which is where we need to be, and it's because we spent $600 million on infrastructure to be able to capture all that gas. The next one is connectivity and flow assurance. We have to continue to work together to make sure we've got adequate takeaway capacity. And if something does happen to DAPL, we are highly confident we can move all of the 1.2 million barrels a day or more of oil production coming out of this basin and get it to a decent market. But to do that, we got to stay on top of it. We got to stay front-footed. We have to continue to invest in infrastructure and work together. Water handling, critically important issue here. Chart on the right shows how many trucks we've taken off the reservation in the last 5 years because of our investment in water handling. That's important to us and our producers. It's an economic function. We get paid for it. It's really important to the MHA nation. And we talk to them about this all the time. We've got to continue as an industry to take trucks off the road. Land restoration and biodiversity. Really proud of my local team here. We just won the Wildlife Habitat Council for our reclamation efforts on the reservation. It's going to be a model for us across the entire industry. We're taking this to the Powder River Basin, where we're the largest gatherer and processor down there. Looking forward to expanding our biodiversity efforts across all the basins that we operate. Really proud of the job the guys have done there. Community investment, you guys have been so charitable over the years. You've continued to invest in scholarship and in job training. We've got to take it to the next level. There's so much additional work yet to be done, particularly with all the social injustice that we're dealing with. Everybody is watching this industry. We need to continue to commit to STEM. We need to commit to scholarship. We've made a big investment in the STEM program here at the colleges, and we are ramping up our scholarship program. Proud to report we actually had our first scholarship winner come back and go to work for the company last year, so really proud about that. And then, of course, our partnership with the tribe is important because we are the largest gatherer on the reservation. We've got a great relationship with them. We continue to work with Mark Fox and the tribal team to reinvest in the community. I'm proud of the Head Start Center that we built a couple of years ago there in Denbury. It's not just symbolic of our community investment, it's symbolic of the partnership between the local communities and the industry, so we need to continue to do that across the board. I think, hey, 30 seconds to go, not bad. Let me just close again with being a cheerleader for the industry. Capital allocation is an important issue for us. This industry is getting close to free cash flow up here in the Bakken. The prices are high enough, which means we don't have to go depend on capital markets activity to raise debt and equity. But we do have a number of producers here that have other choices. They can choose to drill in the Delaware. And so we want to make it easy on them to allocate capital every year to their Bakken development programs by being the kind of midstream partner that really cares about their netbacks, their operations, their flow assurance, and then we all jointly invest in the community together to make North Dakota a better place. Thanks to all that you do for making this industry great. I know last year was a tough year, but this is going to be a really good year for the Bakken, and we're excited to be here and be a part of that. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. Our next speaker will be appearing by video. It's my pleasure to introduce Secretary of Energy, Ms. Jennifer Granholm. She's the second woman ever to take charge of the Department of Energy. She was appointed by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate in February of 2021. Secretary Granholm is the former governor of Michigan, where she served 2 terms, and Secretary Granholm also serves as the first female Attorney General of Michigan. Please help me welcome Secretary of Energy Granholm.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to speak at this year's Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. I want to thank Senator Hoeven for the invitation. Senator Hoeven and I served together as governors. I consider him a friend, and he is a great champion for you. So I really appreciate the chance that he gave me to speak to you today. I know that this has been a challenging year for you. COVID-19 obviously left many businesses reeling as people around the world hunkered down to stay safe from infection. But energy businesses clearly got hit hard as a result. And you know, the good news is today, thanks to the national effort that President Biden's overseeing to beat this virus, that return to normalcy is really on the horizon. But even when we do put this pandemic behind us, the oil and gas industry still faces challenges ahead. So top of mind, of course, is cybersecurity on our nation's pipelines and grid. Since these pipes are carrying energy to all Americans, there is a particular concern that some don't have sufficient cyber protection on their systems. The administration is going to have more to say about this, but suffice it to say that we all need to harden our defenses against these malevolent actors, whether they're rogue or state-sponsored criminals. The issue is just not going away, and it will and must be part of every single organization's planning going forward. And then, of course, the other big challenge beside COVID and hacking, as if those weren't not enough, is that, of course, leading up to the COVID-19 crisis in 2019, America's shale oil boom was showing signs of slowing through drops in demand and increases in layoffs and bankruptcies. in fact, I think in February of 2020, a month before most of the country shut down, officials in North Dakota were projecting a peak in production by the middle of this decade. And at the same time, we can see that the global economy is shifting toward carbon-free and clean energy. You know, it's not just the US. There's 189 countries who are now working toward this clean energy transition. And even in China, which leads the world in emissions, is also leading the world in renewable energy installations and is working to reach net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2060. Even oil and gas majors like Shell and BP, they all want to be net zero by 2050. And the fact is, clean energy is making increasingly good economic sense. The technologies are gaining efficiency, you know, prices are dropping, consumer patterns are shifting, and by the end of this decade, the global market for clean and sustainable technology products is going to reach, at a minimum, $23 trillion. Studies show that the global market for these products that reduce carbon dioxide emissions is going to be $23 trillion. So if America is going to compete in the 21st century, we have to stake our claim in that market. And that's why President Biden has set these ambitious goals around cutting carbon emissions by 52% by 2030 and hitting net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And I understand, totally get, that many in this industry are nervous about that. That kind of goal makes you uncomfortable and worried. When I was governor of Michigan, I looked into the eyes of too many workers who had lost their jobs because the world changed around them in ways beyond their control. I am never going to forget that pain. In fact, that's why when President Biden asked me to serve in this role, I accepted, but on the condition that we will do everything in our power to bring every worker along in this transition. And the president really shares that commitment. We're under no illusion that this is going to be easy for you. The road ahead is difficult. The risks abound. But you know what? That was also true when you started your companies too. In the last 20 years, the Williston enjoyed this renaissance because you embraced a new technique for extraction. And like then, if one's willing to look past the way things have been, you know, they can see new opportunities out there and emerging technologies. I surely hope that you too can see opportunity in this new market as well. And I'm here to tell you, you will not have to do it alone. We want to be a partner. But first, let me be clear. Our position as a global supplier of crude oil and natural gas and other forms of energy, that are traditional fossil energy, that is going to remain important, even as we work to reduce carbon emissions. Our allies, our trading partners, they're still going to need to power their homes and businesses, and we can provide fuels that are less carbon intensive than what many countries currently rely on. So to that end, we at the Department of Energy, we're eager to help you abate emissions in the crude oil and the natural gas supply chain. So let me just start with, for example, methane emissions. We as a country emit more methane than every other country except for Russia. And a big reason why our numbers are so high is that we're letting assets flare, vent, leak away, and we've just got to change that right away. And we can. Through remote sensing and artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can help you identify the sources of these emissions. And there are good jobs for your workers in fixing those leaks. And we also need workers to improve pipeline integrity and to plug orphaned wells. The American Jobs Plan that the president has proposed includes billions of dollars to plug those abandoned wells. And at the same time, we're also putting our brainpower at the Department of Energy and our financial resources to work in advancing carbon capture, utilization, and storage, along with carbon dioxide removal approaches like direct air capture. We've invested billions of dollars in the last 2 decades to develop this suite of technologies surrounding carbon management like CCUS. And what's more, underground carbon storage, it requires the same labor skill sets used for oil and gas exploration. And that means that today's petroleum engineers could be suited to become tomorrow's subsurface carbon managers. Now, as you know, we're also working to develop and deploy renewable technologies, and that includes geothermal energy. And here we also see a great potential for your state and for your industry. The analysis that we have indicates that we can increase geothermal generation up to 52-fold in the next 30 years, which is enough to satisfy 17% of our national energy needs while supporting over 260,000 jobs. North Dakota is well situated, naturally situated to take advantage given the geothermal potential sitting just below your feet. And your companies already have the technology, the knowledge of the land, the personnel needed to harness geothermal. And we are funding efforts to advance geothermal. In February, for example, we invested $46 million in this major advanced geothermal techniques project, which uses the best technical practices from oil and gas to produce 100% clean geothermal energy. Last month, we awarded $15 million to geothermal research projects. We announced another $12 million funding opportunity around increasing efficiency in geothermal systems. So there are opportunities here. And with the American Jobs Plan, we can do so much more to create additional opportunities for your businesses and for your workers. Not only is that plan gonna allow us to move toward commercialization of technologies like carbon capture and hydrogen and geothermal, it's going to help ensure that energy workers are going to be able to benefit from and see a future in energy delivery, especially clean energy. Some 90% of the jobs that the American Jobs Plan will create will require little more than short-term training and a high school degree. Like, for example, the $16 billion that is proposed in there for cleaning up those abandoned oil wells. So there are billions more that are actually proposed for demonstration projects in hydrogen and geothermal and carbon capture. And as President Biden has said, we're open to broad input on what this plan should include. So if there are parts that you like, I hope you will speak up. And if you have ideas, I hope you'll reach out. And I don't just mean on the American Jobs Plan, on methane emissions, on clean technologies, on job creation, on job maintenance, job training. We want to hear from you because the challenges ahead are real. And it's clear we really do need each other to overcome them. And you know, while we may not agree on every policy, I know we can still work together. We can help in whatever ways, help you transform into broader energy companies with long futures ahead in supplying not just oil and gas, but carbon storage and geothermal and wind and solar and more. And we can make sure that you and your workers in the Dakotas and Montana have a leading place in the transition and beyond. So thank you so much for allowing me to come and deliver remarks, and I look forward to working with you. Thanks again.
We were just talking in the back while I appreciate the Secretary's comments. We may have a little diverging thoughts on some of them, and we may hear from this panel today. I'm Blue Holsey. I'm a Senior Vice President at Continental Resources. I'm past chairman of the North Dakota Petroleum Council. And I have realized that's the best office to have is past chairman. If you're ever offered an office, you should go for past chairman first. It's been fantastic to be part of this organization for quite a long time. And I do want to say also that, and I'm sure many of the speakers have thanked the North Dakota Petroleum Council, But our staff is just absolutely tremendous. Brady led us through an amazing session, and he did a fantastic job. Ron, his crew, Tessa, Kristen, Kay, Becky, really the whole team has done fantastic. And I also want to really send a real quick message to Carrie Cutting. And Carrie I've worked with Carrie, I've been with Continental 11 years. I've worked with Carrie for 10 of it. And she's just a phenomenal person, and she's definitely going to be missed. So, Carrie, wherever you're at, thank you for all your work, and we're going to miss you here at Williston Basin. Well, I'm so excited to be part of this group, just to be on stage with this group, and really to introduce two of these people to you. And they're very special and very special to our company. Bill Berry is our new CEO. He has 30 years of experience. He was the Executive Vice President of Production at Phillips, and just a fantastic addition to our team. Has led a crazy year. I'll let him talk a little bit about that. Shelly Lamberts. Shelly is our Chief Cultural Officer at Continental Resources. She's our Senior VP. She certainly elevates this stage, elevates our company, and she's an extreme talent in many, many ways, and we're extremely grateful to have her as part of our team. And then at the end, the guy that needs no introduction, our true rock star at Continental, Jack Stark. Jack is, and I would credit him as being a geologist that really has brought American energy independence into fruition. Just a tremendous man, a leader. And a great friend. So thank you guys for all being here. Bill, let's go ahead and start out. And this is an open conversation, and so anyone butt in. But what a crazy year. You had negative $37 oil in your first.
At the stock price back to the same level it was when I started, So after a year of being in the job, I'm kind of at the break-even position, and so Harold's saying, "So is that a good thing?" And so it's been a tough year, but I tell you, Blair, just maybe a little bit of background on myself. You asked me to kind of go in and share a little bit with everyone here, and I usually don't like to talk much about me. I'd rather talk about anything other than me, but as Blue said, I had about 32 years with Phillips and then ConocoPhillips, and one thing that's probably similar to everyone in this room is that a lot of my career was driven by external events. It was driven by that commodity cycle. It was driven by what governments did everywhere around the world and in the United States. And so, I kind of bounced around about half of my career working outside the States and about a half in the States. And a lot of things that happened here in the States drove what happened to me in my career. Like when windfall profits tax came out, we'll all remember those in the 80s. That drove a lot of work into carbon dioxide, tertiary floods, so had a chance to do a lot of that with Phillips at that point in time. And it's one of the things I'd studied at school, and when I studied petroleum engineering at Mississippi State, so it was familiar, something that's topical in the 80s and topical now, where we look into the transition to energy and what we can do to capture carbon dioxide and go into a different type of a paradigm on that. So from that perspective, something from the government drove the actions in the industry to go into looking at CO2. And then the other things that happened around the world that kind of impacted my career, China opened up in the 80s. Phillips went over there, explored, found a field, had a chance to go over and kind of run that operation, putting into about $1 billion project in China, which was fascinating. Lived there for about 5 years. Same thing in Venezuela. It opened up in the 90s. And of course, it's the same Venezuela that threw all the petroleum industry out in the 70s. And they said, "Come on back, guys, it's different this time." And so we went back in, sure enough, in the 90s, and then we left in the 2000s, So, same thing with FSU, the former Soviet Union. When it broke up, opened up a lot of opportunities. We were at Phillips, a lot like we are at Continental, kind of an organic based company looking at exploration. So we got into exploration in Kazakhstan, ended up finding or participating in a well that discovered about a 20 billion barrel field. Then worked with Russia, ended up participating in that with them, owned about 20% of one of the major companies there, as well as working up in the northern areas there. So it's been a back and forth, working in the U.S. during the M&A activity, done a lot of that in my historical jobs at Phillips. So just kind of an eclectic background, but again, like a lot of you guys in here, you know, these opportunities presented themselves with cyclicality, and maybe a little bit different than what the Secretary was offering, is that this cyclicality does present opportunities for us, but a lot of this is going to be in the petroleum space, and a lot of it's going to be right here. If you look at what's actually happened, the governor mentioned the other day about what this basin has done. You know, this basin started the shale revolution, everybody knows that, but that started $1 trillion transfer of monies to the consumers around the world. So just a tremendous impact. I did want to maybe close, Blue, on one thing and share with you guys a little bit of how I ended up with Continental. So I retired from Phillips, which then became ConocoPhillips in 2008, and then worked on multiple boards. Had a chance to meet Harold and had a chance to come on the board. And what I found immediately upon arrival was it just felt so familiar. You know, it was just almost a little bit like the Phillips that I grew up with in the early days, kind of a family feeling, a sense of caring. And I've had a chance to work all over the world, as I mentioned, with just about every major company out there, doing all kind of things. And what I saw with this team here, it was as talented a group of people as I've ever had a chance to work with. Just a delight, and it's a unique combination, just a fantastic culture of doing the right things for the right reason, embracing technology, taking risks, you know, managing cost, every single penny, and all of that while really, really caring about the people. And you don't see that very often. And so when I had a chance to come in the CEO role, I had never wanted to come do something like this, but I really liked this company so much. And it was because of the caring nature of this. You know, we've gone through lots of cycles, never had layoffs. We just don't do that. That's not in our DNA. And in fact, that's a little bit why when I came in and started talking to Shelley, who was our Senior Vice President for HR, said, would you take on this extra role that Blue was describing, you know, Chief Cultural Officer, because we have this special sauce, and it's so special, we're going to do everything we can to preserve it. So I thank Shelley for stepping up to the role. And I do want, if you don't mind, Blue, I'd like to recognize all the team from Continental that are here. So if you guys wouldn't mind standing up, I know I'm going to embarrass you, but that's part of the territory. So thank you, guys.
We made him sit up front.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect segue, Bill, and it wasn't even planned that way. But Shelley is our Chief Cultural Officer. And Shelley, why don't you talk a little bit about that secret sauce and really your relationship to the company? You've been involved really your whole life. So why don't you tell the crowd a little bit about yourself and that culture?
Well, thank you. I'm so, first of all, I want to say it's an honor to be up here on stage with these gentlemen and you, Blue, as well. Part of the secret sauce, a big part, is this guy right here. You know, and he's been with us for 29 years, you know, long time. He's been a partner of Dad's, a business partner, and a friend for that long. And he's a big reason of why Continental's here. I mean, you look at the rocks, and Jack knows the rocks, and that's why we're here. So kudos to you on that. And
thank you. I'll send you a check.
Okay. But then, you know, when it came time, you know, to start thinking about a new CEO, Bill immediately stepped up, and it was just a perfect fit, perfect combination. He knows the company well and has really been under fire this last year. And a funny story, I mean, we were really talking about, how is the market going to react to having a new CEO and, you know, messaging it right and all that. And then after he came along, the stock actually popped up.
For a day.
So I think Harold was a little offended by that for a minute. No, it's been great, and he's definitely been under fire this year, but it's been great to work with you and enjoying every minute. He's big into developing our people, and that's what we need right now. Just as far as my background, I spent the first decade working on Capitol Hill, and that politics are in everything, so we use it all the time. And but it was time to get out of the Beltway, get back to work. Came back. My first trip to here, I was working for Phillips. Started that in '96, and came up for some safety meetings, and loved the Bakken immediately. But my introduction to the Bakken was going to a 7:30 safety meeting in a blizzard. And then it just turned out to be a beautiful day. Loved this country. From there, I went on to work for, in the philanthropic world. I was executive director for the YWCA in Enid for several years, and we raised funds and built a domestic shelter, and that was really rewarding. Then I got married, moved to Oklahoma City, and when Continental moved, I get this call from Dad, "You ready to come to work?" So I had the privilege of working in our family office for several years until 2018. He asked me if I would join as Human Resources Vice President, and it's been such a joy. It's been a joy to work with the team, get to know everybody involved, and of course work with Dad. I call him Harold too a lot at work, so you'll hear me go back and forth on that.
Just real quickly, Shelley, you chaired, and we've got some members of our COVID response team. I think part of our secret sauce is the commitment is to employees, but we also, and we made a commitment that we were going to bring our folks back fairly quickly from and really that's our secret sauce is the teamwork that is associated with our teams. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what went into really your leadership of that?
Well, I had a great team. We had a COVID response team that started meeting daily when things went south, and we did work from home for a few weeks and quickly realized our teams were suffering. Everybody did a great job at home. Give them a lot of credit for that, but we needed to collaborate, get back together, get that energy back into the office. So started looking, offices are safe environments. Started working on just how to get people safely back in the office, and then we've done a great job. We've worn masks. We held testing clinics in the beginning when tests weren't available, and had for employees and their household members. People needed to know. I mean, had we had it, did we, all that. So did that from day one, and from there, and now that vaccines were out, we started doing vaccination clinics at the office, and proud to say we've gotten 72% of our employees in the Continental Oil Center vaccinated. So we really are close to herd immunity there, and really encouraging as many people to get it as we can.
Yeah, excellent. Jack, we as a company made some strides in a really struggling year in a lot of ways. Can you talk a little bit about the way the company has moved this last year and really what you see, how you see that coming to fruition here in the Bakken?
Yeah, well, it's great. And again, I'm glad we're getting an opportunity here to introduce Bill and Shelley here, and they're just great folks, and we really enjoy the leadership and appreciate your leadership. Okay, but the first, this year, I guess it has been, 2020, one of the most challenging years in all of our lives, probably considering pandemic and low prices. And one of the things I felt was really important for me here in this last year was to really help Bill, in particular, settle into his new role. And I have to tell you, that was a pretty tall task. He wasn't here just a month or two, maybe 3. He sends us all home, tells you got to go work from home. And then when he brings us back, he tells us you got to wear masks, you got to have a temperature survey to come in, you got, and then he went as far as to shut in all our oil wells. So
brought something new.
So anyways, he's finally, here we are today. I mean, after about 5 months, I think he really started to get in the groove, and we got back to business here. No, but no, it's this year has been extremely challenging. But what we do, and I'm sure a lot of folks in the industry do this, but in slow times like we experienced last year, our teams, it took that time to really work on our operating and capital efficiencies. And the innovation and the technology advancements that happened over 2020 have just made us more capital efficient, more operationally efficient than we've ever been. So, hats off to all of our folks in Oklahoma City office, all the regional offices for the work they do. And on top of that, we stay opportunistic. Last year, we added about 200,000 net acres to the company of new assets, really within our own core properties, as well as we entered the Powder River Basin. And so we got more capital efficient, and we actually expanded the company's asset base all in a year when things weren't really looking very rosy. So, but that's what we do. In fact, this company has grown oftentimes, really looking back, typically had good growth spurts in really challenging times.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah.
So that spirit, that passion to keep things going. And we did. We kept our technical team, kept our teams together. That was our priority one. Keep everybody together, like Bill said. No layoffs, and that's how we did it.
Yeah, excellent.
I just want to say something, if I could, Blue, that all joking aside, I would not have been able to make the transition without Jack's help on this space. He was just absolutely supportive, and the geoscience capability we have in this organization led by Jack is just superb, and it was a delight coming in, and I was kind of all over the map, shutting in wells and putting on mass and everything, but a lot of that guidance I was getting that was really helpful early on came from Jack, so thanks,
and
Jack.
all joking aside, truly, I mean, Bill's doing an amazing job. Think about getting put into that position and have all this rug pulled out from underneath you in almost every direction.
Yeah.
And so it's been a galvanizing time for the company as well. Yeah. So it's great. Just continues to build that trust and that strength and in our personal relationships, because we have to lean on each other even more.
Jack, can you just talk a little bit about, and I know this room will want to get your thoughts on really where are we at in this play? I don't know that there's anyone in the world that knows more about the source rocks than you. Can you talk about where you think the future of the Bakken's going to be?
The future is quite bright. There's so much oil in place here, and we'll talk about it. It was 10 years ago, I got to think about this. 10 years ago, I was at NAPE, and I introduced that Continental's opinion was that this Bakken field would ultimately produce 20 billion barrels of oil. And this is down in Houston, and you could hear the gasps in the crowd. I mean, people were even I was a little puckered up too, having putting that number out there. But it made sense. We looked at the facts, and you couldn't deny the facts that this is it. And so here we are, 17,000 wells later. 4 billion barrels have been produced, and this is between Montana and North Dakota combined. And so people's perspectives have improved or changed, I guess I'd say. And Justin Kringstad with the North Dakota Pipeline Authority has, in his April report, put out, and I didn't get to see his presentation yesterday, I think it was on there, but ultimately he anticipates or projects that the Bakken will produce around 20 billion barrels of oil, depending on what scenario you look at there. And when you look at that, it's 20 billion barrels, and based on our estimates of what oil is in place, that's about an 8% recovery. Today, with our technology, we're seeing 12 to 16% type recoveries from our wells. And so when you consider that, I mean, you've got about 20% of the oil produced so far, and we know that there's increased recovery through new technologies that have evolved, and only about 25% of the wells that have been drilled have actually used that newer technology. So there's so much oil left in place, and if you were to just take, say, that 12 to 15% recovery factor, you're north of 30 billion barrels of oil that could ultimately come out of this field. So the prospects are obviously quite bright, and it depends on us to actually find that way, the keys to unlock the future remaining potential. And a couple of the big keys are going to be enhanced oil recovery and refrac technology. I mean, this refrac technology is working, and it's working in areas where you've seen these earlier wells understimulated, and so that makes sense. And then the EOR, there have been multiple tests and attempts for secondary recovery up here at this point, and there's some ongoing right now. But really, in hindsight, they're really in my opinion, they're undersized. You need something with a lot more impact, or something that's a little larger scale and intense. And what I'm referring to is what we've observed in the Eagle Ford. And so when I look at it, I think that we need to step up our game on our attempts out here. And we're doing successfully right now testing a concept in Oklahoma, and we're having good success with it, and we're going to take it to the next level. But we plan to bring that technology up here into the Bakken. And in doing so, if we see the type of results we're seeing there, we're going to be very pleased.
Excellent. Bill, you heard the Secretary's comments, and energy transition is something that many of the people in this room are hearing a lot about. You've got 30 years of experience in the industry and been all around the world and understand energy more than really most in the world. Can you talk about your views and really Continental's views on energy transition and what we really how we're going to go forward with that?
Yeah, thanks, Blue. Probably two parts of that. One, the energy transition, still being defined is probably the best way to describe that. But, are we going to see more electric vehicles? You bet. Is there going to be an effort around the world to try to manage greenhouse gases? You bet. Are we going to participate in that? You bet. That's things that need to be done. If you look at anybody that's done this from a scientific base, from as Harold describes it, from an IQ base rather than an EQ base, then what you see is long-term petroleum has to be there. There's so many uses of it, so many needs of it, and there's around 1 billion people today that just don't have access to electricity. Probably 3 billion in the world that have under access to electricity and to energy. So that needs to be out there. We need more and more energy. And so as we go around and try to figure out what it is that we're going to do, petroleum's going to play a huge part of it. Even if, so when I got in the industry in the 70s, we were producing about 60 million a day, using about 60 million a day. It was a boom time for the petroleum industry. We're about 100 today. And so even the pundits that are out there saying, and these are the ones that are not pro-fossil fuels, not pro-petroleum, saying that 2040, 2050, we're still going to be needing 60 million barrels a day. Well, if we stop investing as an industry today, by 2040, 2050, we'd be producing about 20, 22 million barrels a day. So huge running room. There's a lot that's out there. I know there are some companies, as the Secretary mentioned, some of the European companies are saying, we're going away, we're not going to be in the oil and gas space. Continental's going to be in the oil and gas space. The world's going to be in the oil and gas space. It's just going to be needed. Now, we're all doing the right things, and the really good partnership that's been demonstrated here in North Dakota between all the entities, from the government to the tribes, to the service companies, to the operators, to everyone trying to manage how do we make ourselves more efficient, minimize waste, capture gas, set thresholds for us to hit. Those are important parts of it. But this basin, this industry is going to be around for a long, long time.
Yeah. Shelley, in your role as the SVP of HR, you deal a lot with how employees are speaking about the industry, and Continental's been able to put out some really unique programs. Why don't you talk about some of those that we've been able to do?
Yeah, even our employees get hit by family members. What's going on with the oil and gas industry? And just really needing to sell the message of what we really are about and the good that we do, and so we worked with OERB, Oklahoma Energy Resources Board, to create an ambassador program, rolled out some really great materials for our employees, started with them first, just on what we do, how, a sense of pride about what we are accomplishing as an industry. And we had 200 employees sign up for that. They've been through the materials, and we plan to widen that program nationally. So we're really excited about that.
Excellent. Jack, and I'll ask you that, you mentioned EOR, and here in the Bakken, and when we talk about energy transition, we talk about using carbon and other areas, just to, whether it's capture or all of those other things that are options here. Talk about a little bit about the opportunity in energy transition for North Dakota.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, Chris Kendall was up here just a little while ago talking about the potential for use and what will be the use of CO2 for EOR here in the Cedar Hills field, the whole Cedar Creek anticline area. I mean, it's just a great example of how the CO2 is going to play a part, and it's going to actually allow us to sequester and still benefit, not only by injecting the CO2, but also by benefiting with the oil that is recovered from that. And so that's going on, and I know there's several projects up here in North Dakota right now that are in the works for CO2 sequestration and storage. And so it's it's building. I was talking to John Harrow here earlier today, and I mean, they've been studying this since, I don't know, I think it was early 2000s.
Yeah.
And so it's been a long time that the state and the universities here and all have been looking at the potential here, and they've identified, you know, what reservoirs or what tanks could be the most prospective for this, at least at this point. And the more knowledge we get, the better we'll understand what the possibilities are. But clearly, there's a focus on that, and I think the state's going to play a big role in that.
Yeah, excellent. Bill, a lot of conversation around ESG. And you have been a leader in our company with ESG. Can you talk a little bit about really where you see that coming and the role of ESG in our industry?
Yeah, thanks, Blue. I think if you look at framing ESG, it's a new, set of letters that people are talking about. But in our industry, we've been doing ESG for our entire time. Environmental has always been something we've stewarded, and particularly here in North Dakota, I think you guys have just a really good partnership between all the parties like I was talking about. Put in the right numbers, put in the thresholds, put in the targets we're trying to hit for capturing methane. And the thing that I think in the whole ESG narrative that's out there is probably the S is under-discussed, because at the end of the day, the society is really the thing that we're trying to accomplish, the benefit to mankind. And that's what energy does. And if you go around the world, everywhere you have good quality of life, you could have good access to energy, and that's up to us to make sure that happens. So the ESG platform is impacting our business. We have some people talk about how it's impacting ability to get access to capital. Earlier speakers were talking about it. It's an important part of the communication platform. One could argue that we in the industry probably under-communicated what we actually were doing in the ESG space over the past 20 years or so, and so that's something we're playing a little bit of catch-up. But it is something that's going to be part of the narrative, part of the discussion anywhere you go. The governance, not so much. People are kind of okay with that. There's still a little bit more that we can do in that space. But the S part, what are we doing to help society and make sure that people have access to energy to get their quality of life up? That's the most important thing. And then the E, stewardship, is something each and every one of us needs to look at doing better every single day. I look at it from a total waste management issue. So a lot of times people just look at the E, the environmental, well, that's just greenhouse gas. If you really look at it, it's all industries, all waste. We should be trying to minimize, you try to reduce, you try to recycle, whatever it is that you can do to minimize the impact of the entire environment, whether it's air, whether it's water, whether it's land. So it's a journey, and all of us are continuing on that journey and just need to push ourselves as hard as we can to get to the level that we should be.
Shelley, from an ESG perspective, you've led our team in a lot of areas when it comes to diversification and inclusion, those types of programs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and just people in general. It is about community, and best thing we can do is employ people in the communities we serve. And happy to say we have 325 people employed in the Williston Basin, and that's our number one thing: keeping people employed. And number two is giving back to our communities, and we do give back in the communities where we serve. We've given $12.2 million to date in this area as well, and STEM is a big thing for us. You know about the UND gift that we made. Keep our young people, developing our young people so that they can actually work in these communities is very important, not only to the communities, but to us as well. So we're really pleased with the progress there, and we'll continue to move forward in that regards.
Jack, where do you see ESG in coming into operations at Continental and the implications that it's permeating everywhere? So and you're in all those a lot of conversations around that.
It's always been there, as Bill said.
Right.
I mean, it has been, and I think it's really true that we just haven't done enough to actually message that, because it's just part of what we do. And so it's not like something we're out there advertising, hey, look at what we've done to protect the environment and all, but I think it's becoming more imperative that we do that, and obviously are obligated to do that in many ways, and so I see it just continuing to be a continued focus on what we've done for years, and that's just take care of the environment and our people.
Yeah. Bill, Continental is a legacy company within this this basin. Can you talk a little bit about what that means from the basin perspective, from a production perspective, what that means from an operation, the whole process of why Continental is a different kind of company in this basin?
Well, historically, we've been 10 to 20% of the activity, be it drilling, completions, production, and it's an important part of the basin. The basin's a huge part of us. And one of the things that we did during the downturn is we deliberately, a lot of companies, say, hey, we're just going to take all our rigs down to zero. We're not going to do anything. And, we obviously had to slow down with negative $37 oil prices. It's hard to pay the bills, but even at those low prices, we said we need to keep some activity going, so we need to keep the service industry engaged, keep it active as much as possible. Would have loved to have done more. We weren't able to, but we did keep 2 rigs running up here the whole time, kept their employees employed the whole time, kept the production going. So, the basin is really special to us, and it's something that we feel like we need to, as Shelley's saying, we need to give back and contribute as much as we can to help the basin, but also support it any way we can. I will make one comment on the ESG that maybe we didn't touch on. The east side, and there was a comment that was made, and I don't quote President Biden often, but in his speech to Congress, he did mention that 15% of the greenhouse gas is from the United States, and that's in the world. And so, and his comment right after that was, we cannot do it alone, and that's an absolute true statement. So a lot of the focus on, what can we do to spend an extra XX dollars to get 1 gram out of greenhouse gas out of the United States, the question is, should we be doing something to help the countries around the world, and particularly China and India? That's where the growth is going. That's where the growth in coal is going. So I hope that the administration takes on a more global perspective, because that's really the only way to address the greenhouse gas part of the E.
Yeah. Shelley, you have any comments on that?
Well, just say it again. What was the question?
Oh, what differentiates Continental in this basin versus?
Oh, I tell you what, the people for sure. And when you talk about, I was just thinking about the friendly atmosphere here, and it is like with Harold being with Dad, walking around, and how comfortable he is here. It is like home, and feels like home, and it's just a joy for him to be a part of this. Not only he has a ton of friends here now, it's just a part of who Continental is.
Yeah. Jack, you have any comments?
Oh, regarding Continental?
Yeah.
Here? Oh, I tell you, it is just a part of us. It's a big part of us, obviously, and it's our. We have 60% of our capital going here this year, and we've had 60, 75% of our capital going up here every year. So for years, and so it is a huge part of who we are, who we've been, how we've grown, and it's going to continue to be a very, very large part of the company. Anyways, one thing I wanted to mention here too, as I was sitting there thinking about EOR, never really gave a perspective on what it could be. You think about it, and a simple way to think about it, to me, from what we see as oil in place, every 1% of increase in recovery over and above primary equals about 2.5 billion barrels. That's a lot of oil. Yeah. So what's the size of the prize? Well, you figure out just what percentage of increase can we get as far as recovery, and in my mind, multiplied by 2.5, and you're there. So it's a big number, and so it's just going to be what continues to drive our focus and our activity up here, is not only just drilling and primary production, but looking at that future and what can it bring.
Yeah. Bill and all of you, we recently had obviously a winter event in Oklahoma and Texas, and we've got a lot of production there, and our teams have just performed amazingly, and really, can you talk about really that situation around those operations, and what we gained from here, and how that impacted our folks?
Yeah, so the weather, as you guys know, in Oklahoma, it was pretty horrific. About probably a typical winter day up here in North Dakota. It was something we sure were not prepared for. But what the team did, and that's a lot of times the foundation of anything that goes that well, is what the team does. They got ahead of it. They saw it coming. Took a lot of the benefit and the learnings from here. Of course, things aren't winterized as much in Oklahoma as they are here. But to go out and bring in equipment from all over the country, steamers, so we could actually thaw things out. We put on 24-hour staff, so we're running 24/7. Had different crews on rather than 8-hour days. So we're running 24-hour days, trying to keep things up and running. And what we ended up doing is not only keeping our facilities running, and we lost about 50% of our gas versus probably the average of the other companies lost about 85% of their gas. But what we ended up doing is not only working with our facilities, but work with the pipelines. In fact, one of the pipelines at one point in time, we had more of our people on their compressor than they had on their compressor, trying to keep their compressor up and running to keep it flowing for all the peoples in Oklahoma. And I think it was just a real obvious situation where we really need natural gas. It's a key part of infrastructure anywhere you go, definitely here in North Dakota and Oklahoma. You saw what happened in Texas where they just didn't have it quite as well managed. We didn't have a lot of brownouts, actually where most of us live. We didn't have any at all in Oklahoma, but it was a stressed system. But it was only at that level of capability within electricity in large part because the people out there in really, really tough conditions keeping all the gas on. So I just compliment the heck out of my team there for doing all they did out there in really, really hard conditions. Typical day for you guys, but tough conditions for Oklahoma.
Jack, I know.
Well, you know, Blue, and I do, our teams in Oklahoma did just a fantastic job of really delivering the gas that was so necessary to keep Oklahoma from having blackouts like they had in Texas and what have you. But something you asked about the basin itself and a little perspective, and one of the things that probably ought to share too is just, you know, what do we think, you know, as far as, I'm surprised you didn't ask me where do we think the rig count's going or what have you, but I really think that you're going to see the basin develop, you know, and even see activity in the United States, but here in the basin, still there? Okay. Probably grow at a more measured pace than what we've seen in the past. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It really is, number one, the macro. I mean, supply and demand, there's no reason to put more barrels into an oversupplied market, and things are starting to align as far as the market's concerned. But even with that, the industry itself has gotten into a, you know, the investment community is not rewarding growth as much as they are rewarding cash returns. And so as a result, you're looking at companies that are taking also a little more measured pace as far as their growth is concerned. You know, seeing this low single-digit type growth is something that we hadn't talked about in prior years, right? It's been more grow, baby, grow, and it's not that way right now. And so you're seeing companies being more disciplined about their capital spend and returning, focused on returning, giving returns to shareholder only, not just growth of the assets. And so that's a biggie. And then the other is just the consolidation that you're seeing. At kind of at the peak in here, back in, say, 2012, there were 50 operators drilling wells up here. And there's been a lot of consolidation now that's happened in the industry. And right now, we've got 16 rigs drilling in the state right now here in North Dakota. And that's, you know, and so you got 50 operators. And I think in general, I think there's about 11 operators that are operating those 16 wells. Rigs. So it just shows you that you've got a smaller base, and these companies that now control the assets actually have broader assets and are more diverse portfolios than just the Bakken. So I think you'll see capital that's also allocated proportionally to those assets as well in their portfolio. So just thought I'd share that as well. It's just a perspective that we have at least.
Yeah, can you expand on that, Jack? I mean, we talk a lot about how wonderful this basin is, and why do you think it's others aren't seeing the shine that we see from a market perspective, from a holistic perspective?
Well, I think it's a misperception of the potential that still remains up here. That's it. And you know, there's always been that period of time. I mean, there's periods all through the Bakken history where, I mean, very early on, people didn't believe it at all. Yeah. So I think time will show that this is continuing to deliver. I mean, Bakken is the quality oil play in the United States. In fact, it's a template for tight oil worldwide. And so, you know, the field has got so much ahead of it yet that to be developed, and I just think it takes time for people to absorb what the potential is.
Yeah. Bill, do you have any comments on that? What can this basin do to be more in front and be more assertive as far as the message is concerned from a basin perspective?
Well, I think all of us, a little bit what Shelley was talking about, the ambassador program, a little bit of, because a lot of what we're seeing is, the investment coming in, some of it's tempered by the Williston perspective, some of it's tempered by the petroleum perspective. So as Shelley was talking about, all of us can play an ambassadorial role out there to the investment community saying this is a great place to be, and it's got great opportunities, and it's got, as Jack's talking about, a lot of running room left. So us getting out there, communication, and then all of us, we're this whole organization that are represented here. We make the basin happen, from the operators to the regulators to the service entities to the landowners, royalty owners. All of us are involved in this, and so the more we can figure out and get our heads together, how do we take it to the next level? I think that's the biggest opportunity for us. It's been done fantastically. Like I said, I've had a chance to live and work all over the world and see how these different type of coalitions come together. I think North Dakota has done it as well or better than any place in the world in making it work and making it work very, very well. And it's just for us, up to us to say, okay, let's take it to the next level and communicate out there that this does have a lot of running room, and let's go realize it.
That's right.
And Blue, one other thing I'll add too is just it's the infrastructure. I mean, today, the infrastructure has never been better than it is today, right? And it allows us to capture all our molecules now, really more efficiently than we ever could. And it's continuing to expand right now, but we consider it a more measured pace of growth, and the infrastructure that's in place and a bit that's expanding as well, as we know in a few areas. And the fact is that that's going to really benefit this development of the field. It's more capital efficient, and it's more just efficient in every angle. So you go back 10 years, and my gosh, we were really where can these barrels go? How are we going to handle this gas? And the industry's just done a fantastic job. The midstream industry, the regulatory environment, everybody's worked together to get to where we're at today, and the infrastructure's never been better than it is today.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about gas capture? I know that's been a leadership role that Continental's taken, and your commitment to that. Can you mention that, Bill?
Yeah, we're currently at 98.9%, and in the Bakken, we're committed to no routine flaring, and this is something that we've accomplished. The state and the industry did a superb job of setting thresholds for everybody to move that along, and we keep ramping it up. And now we've got a little over 1%, and we're trying to figure out how to optimize that remaining piece, because all of us talked about, and we all know, best thing to do with the gas is to sell it somewhere rather than just flare it.
Yeah. We only have a few more minutes remaining, but I want to ask all three of you, as leaders of, if you've got a crystal ball, where do you see Continental in 25, 50 years, and where do you see this basin, this industry, and kind of what's your viewpoint of the future of where we're at? I'll start with Bill.
Well, there's two parts of that, and we just had a strategic planning conference with all the key management in the company, senior management in the company, and our board of directors. And one of the things we talked about was Jim Collins's book, Built to Last. And so, the thing that we're going to do with this company, if you look at what Harold did with this company, and Jack, as you guys put this stuff together, it's over 50 years old. So we're talking about the next 50 years, the next 150 years. How do we get there? And so, one of the things that we haven't talked about, but I might share a little bit, is because Harold's such a well-known institution up here that, and just share with you a little bit, how Harold and I have been working together to try to address this very issue. So our office is about 10 feet apart from each other, and so we, as we're thinking about things, in the morning or the afternoon, we just kind of go in and bounce ideas off each other, go back and forth. So it's just been a wonderful relationship, and it's, as you guys know, Harold and what he accomplished, just his vision, his capacity for challenging, and as Jack was talking about, even in the downturn, Harold was saying, what can we be doing? What can we be doing? There's opportunities out there. This is a time to actually go out there and see if we can realize some of those. So I think, the ownership of Continental is so special because of the family ownership. It gives us the ability to make quick moves, quick decisions, to make strategic decisions, and sometimes if we want to go counter with the culture, counter with the waves of what everybody's saying they should go. So from that perspective, this company's going to be around, and that's seriously, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, next decade. We're talking about next century. What do we need to do today to make sure we're here the next century? And my expectation in the Bakken, probably be still producing in the next century.
Yeah, love it. And if you do walk by their office, you better be prepared for whatever question's going to be asked. Because
Yeah.
Shelley, I know we're going to go over just a little time because I know it's just the Secretary of State. He'll wait.
Yeah.
Shelley, talk about just real quickly where you see this company.
Well, our future is bright. It definitely is. We've got you see these strong leaders down here. We are constantly looking at where we are in the market. What do we need to be doing? We are so agile and nimble because of our lean structure and able to do what we need to do. Feel very good about the future. It's very helpful for Harold, Dad, to have Bill here get out of the day-to-day so that he can be that advocate for this industry, fix some of the misinformation that everybody's given. So everybody needs us. We know that. Energy poverty is real across the world. We're going to be a part of that solution.
And Jack?
The Continental will continue to be a leader in the energy space, no matter what all that involves. And obviously, we believe fully that hydrocarbons are going to play a big part, even with all the rhetoric that's going on right now. You go out and look around you, what isn't running on hydrocarbons for the most part? We're for all the sources of energy. That's no problem with that. But the fact is that any projections I've seen, they show increasing demand for energy, and every time you look at whatever plot you see, hydrocarbons are more than 50% of that, right? They're 60+%. And you're looking at that, and you're just going, we're going to be an energy supplier and leader, and we're doing it for the reasons. I mean, the energy renaissance, we've been thrilled and blessed to be part of this amazing transformation and energy renaissance that's happened in the Bakken here in North Dakota and Montana has absolutely been at the center of that generating that independence here from oil that we've experienced, and it's just been great to be part of that, and we'll continue to be on that leading and sometimes bleeding edge of technology, as we always have. And one thing I heard you mention, Bill, and it was about ownership. And one of the things that I don't know that everybody realizes, but everyone in the company has shares. Everybody in the company owns stock. And and that's really something else that ties everybody together because we're all pulling in the same direction for all the same reasons. And that's just one added component that is really unique to our company because we're all shareholders.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for taking your time, and thank you for all our staff for being here. As you can see, the basin, the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference is a big deal for our company, and so we appreciate the time that the organization is giving us, and thank you guys for being here and supporting this organization as well. So
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. That was fantastic. We're going to move on with the rest of the program here. Joining us in spirit is another champion for the energy industry, North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer. Senator Cramer was elected to the United States Senate on November 6, 2018. After serving 3 terms as North Dakota's at-large member of the United States House of Representatives, while a member of the House, Cramer made constituent outreach a top priority, describing interacting with the public as best part of public service. According to the Legistorm, the Capitol Hill Government Issue website, Cramer held more town hall meetings than any other member of Congress during his years in the House. Please welcome, virtually, North Dakota U.S. Senator Kevin Cramer.
Well, greetings and thank you for the opportunity to address you through this video. And I trust you're having a successful get-together and a real pleasure, I'm sure, to meet in person right there in Normalville, USA. It's obviously a challenging time for American industry, including the energy industry, between the economic downturn caused by the government's response to COVID to the effects of last year's oil price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia, and of course now, the anti-American energy actions coming from the Biden administration. Clearly, our producers face an uphill battle. Now, I heard the young girl from Sweden was recently called again to testify in the U.S. House of Representatives. And things have certainly gone downhill there in the House since Mike Pompeo and I served together, but I digress. But Greta was called to share her expertise on tax policy in support of the left's whole of government approach to put fossil fuel producers out of business. In fact, they're trying to get the federal government completely out of the business, literally by canceling required oil and gas leasing on federal lands of federal minerals. Included, of course, in President Biden's climate crisis executive order, this action falls outside the law, and it's already having a negative impact on our states and communities, of course, industries, and the various bipartisan funding that's reliant on oil and gas leasing revenues. So I, along with a lot of my colleagues, are working to oppose these efforts and to shine a light on the harm that they're going to do to our country and, frankly, to the climate across the globe. I'm also working where I can with the other side of the aisle. One area is a bill that Senator Lujan and I are leading that's called the ReGrow Act. It stands for Revive Economic Growth and Reclaim Orphaned Wells. You know, Governor Burgum, Lynn, Helms, and other leaders in North Dakota made a great call when they used several $1 million of CARES Act money to plug and reclaim abandoned wells. It put a lot of people back to work rather than keeping them on the unemployment rolls. So our bill would build off of that initial success here and provide funds for laid-off energy workers to plug tens of thousands of orphaned wells across the entire country. We're also working to fix our nation's crumbling infrastructure. From my position as ranking member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee on the Environment and Public Works Committee, I'm working on a bipartisan infrastructure proposal which would invest in our roads and bridges, drinking and wastewater systems, and I'll do my part to make sure that it works for North Dakota. But we have to remember, infrastructure is more than a government invested in roads and waterways. It's billions of dollars of private investment in energy transmission systems, and of course, many public-private partnerships, all of which produce bigger and better outcomes if they have an appropriate light-touch regulatory regime. So it's both the federal investment and an appropriate regulatory oversight. And of course, as is our constitutional duty, the Senate's been active in the nomination process. And bringing back Obama administration veteran Janet McCabe as the deputy administrator of the EPA was really a bridge too far for me. But I did decide to take Michael Regan at his word to work in partnership with states and tribes and regulated businesses in a transparent process as the head of the EPA. Michael is committed to visiting North Dakota to see firsthand our excellence and to hear from our people who make it happen in the right way. Now, on the Senate Banking Committee, we've held a number of hearings already this Congress where I've urged my colleagues to abandon their calls for financial service providers to discriminate against law-abiding, credit-worthy businesses like yours. Under this administration, we're facing a full court press from the suite of financial agencies and Biden czars pressuring banks, credit rating agencies, boardrooms, you name it, to direct financial capital away from you, the high wage-paying employer. And I've reminded my colleagues and the executives of the largest financial institutions that the world's going to consume these affordable and reliable sources of energy for decades. And if you shut off our domestic production by shutting off their capital, not only will we suffer economically, but we'll return to importing oil and natural gas from unfriendly foreign sources. As you know, I also hold a seat on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Now, this provides me not only with the honor of ensuring that our men and women in uniform have the resources they need to succeed, but also an opportunity to highlight the national security benefits that America's oil and gas producers provide to our nation and to our allies. The Dakota Access Pipeline and several other interstate oil and gas transmission systems aren't just opportunities to keep Americans working, although they are that, but they provide the peaceful tools of American energy development rather than the weapons of war to keep our nation and world safe, while keeping Americans employed. American shale keeping a market cap on oil prices is not only good for the American economy, but it keeps cash out of the hands of Vladimir Putin and, of course, Ayatollah Khomeini. And supplying the United States of America's armed services and forces with the petroleum they need not only fuels a patriotic flyover, but it assures that Xi Jinping his calculus to take over the South China Sea can't compute. Now, before I go, I want to say thank you to all of you for the work you do in the Williston Basin and in the Bakken. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me in my office if we can ever be of assistance. It's an honor, of course, to serve you and the people of North Dakota in the United States Senate, and it's a top priority of mine to make sure your voice is heard and that you have a seat at every table. Now, I can't think of anyone better in this country to speak with all of you today about these and many more issues than my friend and former colleague, Mike Pompeo. Mike attended West Point, as you know, and he served in the U.S. Army, reaching the rank of captain. He's a Harvard Law School graduate and led businesses in the aerospace and oil and gas industries. Kansas elected Mike 4 times to represent the 4th District in the United States House of Representatives, where I was able to serve with him for 4 of those years. Sitting right in front of him on the dais of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I learned a lot from him, until, of course, President Trump appointed him as the director of the CIA. He was so darn good at that job that the president made him the Secretary of State just 1 year later. With a firm grasp of global issues, a good understanding, obviously, of soft power, and the important role of military leverage, Mike excelled as our nation's top diplomat, where he put America first on the world stage. Mike's one of the smartest and most talented people to serve our nation, and I can hardly wait to see what he's going to do next. And I'm not talking about his upcoming speech today. Thanks for all you do and your kind attention today. God bless all of you. Now, please give a warm Bakken welcome to one of the very best people I've had the honor of working with, my friend, Mike Pompeo.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. When I get that much applause before I've spoken, it makes me really nervous. Senator Kramer just gave some incredibly nice remarks. He and I became good friends when we had a chance to serve together in the House of Representatives. He and your other senator are doing fantastic work for you in Washington, D.C. I want to thank everyone for giving me this chance to be here this morning. When people introduce me as the 70th Secretary of State, I'm reminding that President Trump was the 45th president. There was a lot more turnover in my job than in his. And so I was thankful for every day I had. 4 years of a tremendous privilege to serve America, to serve the Trump administration, first as the director of the CIA and then traveling as America's most senior diplomat. People talk about firsts, so I was the first person to ever serve in each of those 2 roles, to be the CIA director and then the Secretary of State. But I think for today, the most important first is I think I'm the first Secretary of State that would know the difference between a drilling rig and a pumping unit. Yes. When someone says you're headed to the doghouse, it has a different meaning. I get it. I also think I'm the first Secretary of State who ever was at a trade show like this, had his own booth selling pumping units and downhole equipment and sucker rods and all the things that you all know so well. It was a wonderful time in my life. I met such amazing people, including people like you who are all here today engaged in this incredibly important mission. I'm going to get a chance to take questions. My remarks this morning will be short, but there are a few things that I want to make sure that you know. I'm reminded of a story. You all will remember when crude oil fell, there was a WTI prompt contract at minus $37 or so. But for me, I remember, by the way, the president called me and he said, Mike, this is not good. But I was reminded of 10 days before that when he and I were engaged with the world, when OPEC was trying to sort out its price reduction cuts, and the Russians and the Saudis and the Mexican government were engaged in a fierce debate. You could see that oil markets were under stress. Your senators were calling our office, calling leaders around the world, and I was fully engaged. I was fully engaged talking with the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, with President Obrador in Mexico, with my counterparts in Russia, sending a clear message that we were going to protect and preserve our industry. We were going to do the right things so that markets would be stable and prosperous. We knew we were confronting a tremendous collapse of demand as a result of the Wuhan virus, and for wise decisions, for cooler heads not to prevail in this conflict, making sure that we had a supply in a place that we could continue to see investment. We knew that there was real risk to the jobs right here in places like North Dakota. 3 lessons. One, first, American leadership matters. We were there driving that process, using all the tools that we had in our toolkit to make sure that they made a good, sound, reasonable decision. We averted what could have been a real crisis in a way that delivered good outcomes, a sustainable path forward for fracking in the shale industry all across the United States of America. It was an imperative. We listened to every voice. We knew we had to get markets right. And then the third lesson is the one that I'll spend a couple minutes on before I take questions. Third is it saw the absolute nature of the role that is played by energy producers here in the United States of America to keeping Americans safe and secure. When you all get this right, when we allow you to go out and do the great things you do, to compete, to build, to invest, to create technologies for the future that make the operations of the oil and gas wells safer and cleaner and protect the environment in ways that you all care so deeply about, when we do that well, the risk that we ever have to have one of our kids go fight someplace in a far-off country to preserve and protect our way of life is greatly diminished. I saw this every day as Secretary of State. The examples are legion. I met with several hundred foreign leaders and foreign ministers around the world during my 4 years as Secretary of State. I very seldom had a meeting where energy wasn't at or near the top of the list. This may surprise you how involved American diplomats are in America's energy and how much we care about our capacity to deliver this energy around the world. But leaders from Bulgaria to Vietnam to the Philippines are all challenged to make sure they have the ability to develop not only their own resources, but know that they have a friend, an ally, a country like the United States of America that is prepared to help them, to defend them, to preserve their capacity. They don't have to take energy from our adversaries. You all deliver that from places like right here in North Dakota on behalf of the United States of America each day. Look, I represented a district that had a similar laydown. We weren't nearly as prolific as you all here in North Dakota, but we have agriculture and oil and gas industries that matter an awful lot to people all across our state. It mattered to our communities who had tax revenue that was connected to this activity. I watch this administration sets its sights very much on denying this capacity for American national security to be bolstered by what it is you do here every day. Just now, 100 and some odd days on, the Biden administration has made pretty clear their objectives. They've proposed variations on the so-called Green New Deal. They've put moratoriums on the operations on federal lands. I must tell you, the Russians and the Saudis are thrilled. It's funny. They say our administration was soft on Russia. Denying America the capacity to build out its own energy resources is the biggest gift one could give to Vladimir Putin, a nation that is wholly dependent on its energy resources. Now, you had some incredible leaders from Continental Resources here before me. You heard from Senator Kramer. I am not about to give you advice on how to run your business, and you know about the political challenges that confront your industry today. You'll manage your way through them. But know this. Know the broader implications as you speak about this as well. The greatest threat outside of the challenges we face here inside of our country, the greatest threat to your children and grandchildren is the continued goal of hegemonic power of the Chinese Communist Party. Know that they get 60% plus of their energy from abroad. It cannot dump enough solar panels out of its own economy to take that, pump them out, to take that down significantly. And they've got goals. We re-entered the Paris Peace Accords. The Chinese Communist Party was applauding. They have no intention of complying even with their silly promises for 2050 and 2060. Make no mistake about it, they welcome the United States abandoning the competition for producing energy around the world. We cannot allow that to continue to go on. I had a great story, deeply connected to North Dakota. I saw it firsthand. I was in Belarus. No Secretary of State had been to Belarus for a couple of decades. I met with their leader, Viktor Lukashenko. And they were in a price war with the Russians. The Russians supplied nearly all of the energy for Belarus. And I made the simple statement at a press conference. I said, America stands ready to deliver its crude oil, its petroleum products to Belarus at any time. Vladimir Putin was not happy. At the very least, he was going to have to sell at a cheaper price. I was hopeful that America would be able to gain some market share. And in fact, a North Dakota company delivered the first American shipment of petroleum products into Belarus, reducing our geopolitical risk and making the opportunity for Belarusian people to live in a country that was more like the democracy that we know and love here, You all did that. You delivered that. I want to encourage you and indeed the rest of the world to get on with this project. We can deliver safe and affordable energy. We can do it in a way that preserves and protects our environment, and we can do it all across the world. We were so involved in the energy issues in Venezuela and in Iran and in Eastern Europe, where every country wanted to be the country that had a natural gas terminal so that American energy could be delivered into their country. They knew we were a great partner. They knew we were great friends. They knew we could deliver this affordable project to them. And I want to encourage each of you to continue to do that, continue to produce, continue to outstrip the world. Our energy blueprint mattered an awful lot to the United States of America. I was blessed to be a member of Congress in 2015 when we lifted the moratorium on the export of crude oil, one of the dumbest U.S. policies in the history of our country. That's saying something. Last thought, there is a deep connection between this administration's stated goals with respect to your energy and its objectives politically. As you consider how to make your case with this set of leaders, folks like Gina McCarthy and former Secretary Kerry, never shy away from considering the larger issue as well. These progressive clean energy processes, these proposals, are a little bit about energy and a little bit about climate and a lot about control. They want to change the way we think about this amazing nation, this most exceptional nation in the history of civilization. They want more power, they want more control, they want more regulation, they want the ability to deny you all here in North Dakota to live your lives in the way that you would like to do. We've seen this, we've all experienced it. North Dakota made great decisions about how to manage the Wuhan virus. You did it right, your governor and your lieutenant governor made good decisions, your state legislators supported that. And you continued to run your economy and continued to deliver on behalf of the United States of America. You did not allow the federal government to control how you thought about making sure you protected your health while preserving your economic prosperity. Look, these things can continue. You all know how to do it. You all should know I am counting on each and every one of you to push back against the efforts to undermine what's at the core of American greatness, our capacity for entrepreneurs and innovators and families to worship and work in the way that they choose. When we do that, when we defend that with all of our might, no one, not our federal government, not the Chinese Communist Party, has the capacity to undermine what has made our nation so special. Thank you all. God bless you, and I look forward to taking some questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much.
It's great to be here.
It's great to have you, and what an honor it is to have you here in North Dakota. We met last night. My name is Kathy Nessett, and as the council chairman, I get the honor to ask you a couple questions.
Sounds good.
We've had some questions shared with us. First off, I'm going to give you a little insight to this audience we have here. As you probably noticed, I think we bleed red, white, and blue.
Amen.
So, Mr. Secretary, there is an issue that just seems to mystify most of us in this room. And I'm going to take you back about 15, 20 years ago, and our nation was importing crude oil, probably over 60% of the crude oil. And you mentioned adversaries and enemies. These are the kind of countries that we were importing from. We go ahead, we do our shale revolution, we really build this out, and this great country is now not only energy independent, we are energy dominant. Now, why do we seem to get to the point that we have a world or an administration that wants to shut things down? They want to shut down pipelines, they want to shut down this industry, and yet this is the very, very industry that has made us energy dominant. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it's a head scratcher, to be sure. One, I try to avoid conspiracy and go into the dark side. Although having been the CI director, I can do it with the best of them. Look, Look, in the end, this idea on climate is an article of faith. It is a near substitute for religion to many on the left. We have to be honest about this. Every one of you is involved with engineers. You're involved with scientists. You're doing high-end technology work. I'm all happy to deal with science. And I want the best science to make sure that we preserve our environment in ways that my grandkids will be proud of us as having been stewards. But what they're proposing is something different from that. What they're proposing is something radically different from that. And you can tell because no other nation in the world is headed down this path. If you think that the worst polluters in the world, countries like the Chinese, if you think they are about to trade their economy for some noble carbon offset, anyway, I still pray for you, right? They're not about to do that. And we shouldn't either. We can get it right. We can do each of these things. When I see these ideas that are put forward in ESG legislation, one has to make sure that they are fundamentally based on reality and on science. If we move away from that, if this becomes political or theological or disconnected from the reality of making sure that we actually have clean, affordable energy, something you all produce each and every day, then we do run the risk that other countries will benefit from this enormously. They won't participate in the charade that is the Paris Climate Accords, and our prosperity and our economic growth will be under threat for decades to come.
Interesting. There's a lot to this. I'm going to follow up on one of the comments that you were just talking about, and this this word called climate, and this word about carbon, and it's used and bantered about so much these days. We're hearing that it's a bad word, and yet I shared with you I'm a geologist, have a little bit of that science background. Last I checked, we need carbon, and there's plants and trees, and that take in carbon dioxide. So if we try to get back a little bit to the science part of this, I want to know when you travel the world, is the rest of the world talking this crazy and climate, or are we on an island?
Sadly, we're not completely on an island, but you'll be pleased to know that it mostly exists in international organizations like the UN and leftist organizations in Brussels and big countries in Europe. The rest of the world, the real world, who's out there fighting to make sure that the next generation has the energy that they need, whether that's, we think about cars and electricity, right? This comes to every American's mind first, but plastics and all the things that we touch, medical devices, all of them have a component that is deeply connected to the capacity of you all to deliver crude oil and natural gas and refined products all across the world. Most of the world gets this. You see this. They're still searching for offshore fields all across the world. I went down to Suriname and Guyana where they found a massive discovery, going to end up being developed by America's best engineers, I suspect, because that technology only exists one place here in the United States in American companies. So I'm convinced we will benefit from this as well. We need to support our friends and allies who are working on this project. We need to do all of that while taking the narrative when it can't be enough to shout the word climate from the top of a tree to shut down the American economy. And I'm afraid much of the narrative, you see it on television networks, right, who propagate this storyline. They find personal stories, this Greta woman, right? They find these stories and these people who carry this narrative that is just deeply disconnected from the reality of what it is that the American energy industry does each and every day.
But it has a loud microphone. I mean, that group has a very loud voice.
Yes, they do. So do you. You all have loud voices too. I assure you, we heard you when I was a member of Congress. Be louder. Tell the story. Yeah. And tell the story with pride and a smile on your face. This they don't do. They scream and they rant. We should be decent and good and defend the work that we're doing. The work that we do is incredibly defensible, and so be proud of everything that you're delivering on behalf of America, working families all across our country, and indeed the work that you do that helps people like me who have this diplomatic role to engage in a world where America has the capacity to get good outcomes for the United States and its security. If you'll carry your voice, if you'll stay at it, I know there are days it is frustrating. I know some of you have traveled to Washington. Thank you and God bless you for doing that. Keep at it. Keep telling elected officials all across America why you do what you do, how you do it, and the importance of what you do to everyday Americans all across our country.
You know, I do think that is. It's one of the things that we could do better. Tell our own story. I really do think that, you know, as an industry, by nature, we seem to be a little bit more reserved at times.
No, we work, right?
That we do.
We work. We think if we deliver a good product, then this should be sufficient. They are trained activists, right? There are fundamental differences in how we interact in the world. And so, yeah, sometimes it's the case we're a little quieter because we think, oh, boy, shouldn't it be just enough that we deliver this great set of services, great products to the world? We've got to make sure that we continue to tell the story and tell the story in a way that the world can understand the amazing good that has been delivered to people all across the globe from America's capacity to build out its own energy portfolio.
Awesome. Totally agree. Let's change things up a little bit. You have the expertise and such of travels around the world. I want to go to China with this, and I'd like to know a little bit the game of maps. And the South China Sea. And we know that China, you've in your remarks, you mentioned the need for that part of the world to get energy, to import energy. Most of it comes from the Middle East, and there are choke points along the way.
Yes.
I just really want you to visit. It seems that the Chinese are trying to change the, international boundaries and such. Can you shed some light on that?
Sure. Kathleen, you started that question by saying you want to go to China. I'd like to too, but I've been sanctioned, so I can't. I can't. So you'll have to go without me.
Oh, okay. I don't think it'd be as much fun.
But I can imagine what it might be like. Look, the Chinese Communist Party understands the central nature of energy to them bringing the next 100 million people out of poverty. It's a nation of some 1.4 billion people. It's got a middle class that rivals the middle class of any country in the world. They know this is central to the next 50 and 100 years of their success, so they have laid down a deep strategy that they have been building out for decades now. Some of it's geopolitical, that is, they have their first external non-Chinese military port in a place called Djibouti. So it's in a very strategic place. We had a map up here, and you could see the shipping lanes. Some of you would know this. This history of energy as a global game is something that we've all known for a long time, right? Think of Central Asia and the Great Game and all of the history of the global energy industry. But the Chinese have figured it out. And they have figured out that the United States isn't about to be their friend or ally because they are going to seek to undermine the way that we live here in the United States. And so they are doing the things they need to do, certainly in the Middle East, but elsewhere, when they don't believe they have resources underground in their country sufficient to support 1.4 billion people. We attempted for 4 years, for the first time, and this is not partisan, for the first time was an administration that was prepared to confront the Chinese Communist Party in every element. I'll give you an example that's should be close to your heart. I made the decision, along with FBI Director Chris Wray, to close the Chinese consulate, their diplomatic facility in Houston, Texas. One of the reasons we did that is because they were stealing intellectual property from energy companies that are operating right here in the Williston Basin. People under diplomatic cover were conducting what can only be considered spying. They were stealing stuff that matters, that destroys jobs in America. We shut them down. No administration before ours would have been prepared to do that because they imposed a real cost. They ended up closing one of our facilities inside of China. We have to take this challenge from the Chinese Communist Party seriously because they tell us that we should take it seriously. We should listen to Xi Jinping when he talks about the China dream. It is not about win-win. We need to confront them in every sphere, economic. Need to be ready to make sure our military is capable of defending the places we need. I saw it up close and personal. The Vietnamese were trying to drill in their own economic zone, and the Chinese sent ships around. We made the decision to send some of ours, and we're able to convince the Chinese they needed to back off. These are the kind of things one can do. It's not about sending our kids to go fight a war with the Chinese. This is about demonstrating resolve, speaking with clarity, and having a deterrence model that is sufficient to push back against the threat that it poses to the United States.
As a follow-up to that, you talk about the diplomatic tool that energy is, but going hand in hand along with that is the cyber risks and the challenges to our cybersecurity. How significant is that as we watch this issue with the pipeline, the Colonial on the East Coast?
Oh, I'm sure that there's very few of you who are in business out here who haven't had some kind of cyber attack on the infrastructure, your system. Maybe it's your administrative piece, maybe it's the operational piece of your business. I saw dozens of attempted attacks like the one we saw take place with Colonial this past week during our time. We thwarted some of them. Some of them we were able to push back on just at the right moment. We never had the calamity that happened to Colonial this week on our watch. But I'm mindful that our adversaries know that this cyber tool is cheap, and offense is easier to play than defense, and America has been loath to respond to these in the way that is going to be required. But this was, if I'm right, and I don't know this, but if I'm right, and this turns out to have been something that emanated from Russia, then we have to hold those who actually led, conducted, authorized, condoned this attack from Russia accountable. This is an attack on a Central American institution. The capacity for us to move our products around this country, whether that's by truck or rail or pipeline, is central, or by electricity moved across electrical lines. Those pieces of our infrastructure are central to our way of life, and we need to make sure our adversaries know that we won't tolerate these kind of cyber attacks, and we need to impose real costs on them. The tools are available to do so. We simply need to have leaders with the wherewithal and the understanding of a deterrence model that can lead us in the right direction. They're equivalent to acts of war when nation states conduct cyber operations against us here in the homeland. Those bits and bytes are different in kind than a kinetic attack, but the impacts and outcomes that can result from them are no less dire, and we need to treat them in the same way we do the other kind of attack as well.
Do we have the urgency to do that?
So there's lots of money that's been invested. Lots of your companies spend lots of money defending your systems, hiring consultants, doing the right things. I applaud you all for that. Regulators across America, I'm confident your regulators here in North Dakota are doing all that they can as well to make sure that the infrastructure piece of this, the governmental piece of this is right, and that we're sharing information in a way that is sufficient to deter most of these and to stop them. These are difficult questions. We need to make sure that we allocate the resources to this and we think about the strategic underpinnings, right? Some of the attackers want just money, right? When the North Koreans attack, it's to make $1 million or a couple $1 million. The Russians usually have a financial objective as well, although they're trying to undermine us. The Chinese is almost always aimed at influencing American political decision makers. So different kinds of attacks each undermine our republic.
Interesting. Coming back into the U.S. and talking, from state to state, a question that was posed to us: are we in a battle between states who produce food and fuel versus those who consume and have no concept of what it takes to bring these products to market?
Oh, I don't know if it's a battle, but we have to stamp out ignorance wherever we find it, right? Right? I mean that in the kindest way. I truly do. There are things I'm ignorant about as well. We all learn, right? There's things we've spent time studying or we know, and there's things we don't know. We need to make sure that people understand that in our schools we're teaching these issues, that they understand that when the lights turn on, you might find a solar panel that can pull it off, but most times it's going to come from a power generation source that has fossil fuels, and that's okay. And we need to talk about these things in a science-based way and enlighten all Americans about the interactions we take for granted in the United States. I don't know how many countries I traveled to where they were lucky if their entire country had power for 6 or 8 hours a day. Not even just the countries you come to mind, but so many countries continue to struggle with the basic ability to produce electricity and deliver it to the residential level and even to their businesses, countries that can't grow because they don't have enough power for companies to want to invest and grow their businesses there. We take that for granted. We shouldn't let that happen anywhere, whatever state that may be. I don't think it's a battle so much as that there's this responsibility to make sure everyone understands the complexity of our economy, the power of the American energy industry, and why it matters to each and every American citizen.
We talk about this as energy being a diplomatic tool, and we've talked about this, you brought it up in your comments before. You know, those of us who find this energy, we produce it, we bring it to market, we then export it. You know, a fabulous position for the United States to be in, and that does create a diplomatic tool. Do you feel that that tool, is it being marginalized? Is it being misused? Is it being ignored? And to be quite honest with you, is it being demonized?
You know, I could only speak to what we did. Okay. We were, it didn't matter where I was. So I spent time, so you have presidents, right? We have an Eastern Med energy initiative. So Prime Minister Netanyahu, the then president of Greece, the leader of Cyprus all show up to meet with the American Secretary of State because they're going to build that natural gas system in the Eastern Mediterranean from 3 countries that are an awful long away, and they wanted the United States to be part of this. They needed our technology, they needed our businesses. This was something that we would have that conversation, we would go back, and then we would talk about other things, knowing full well that America's capacity to deliver and help them succeed was going to create more security for them, and that the United States could use this in a way that benefited the people of the United States of America. We often knew that we had this tool. I think about Iraq, a place that is incredibly troubled. They needed our big companies to produce power turbines and energy generators, that we wanted to wean them from Iranian electricity and Iranian natural gas, and we used the power of America to deliver those outcomes from them, from a products perspective, from a services perspective, from a technology perspective, that was a central part of our diplomatic effort to convince the Iraqis to stand up an independent, sovereign country and not be connected to Iran. Those are just a couple of quick examples of how the Trump administration used what you do every day to create the conditions for geostrategic stability that matters an awful lot to the United States.
Well, let's just follow up on that notion of Iran and where they are now. If the current administration were to lift sanctions and then Iranians start dumping fuel or crude oil onto the market, 1-2 million barrels a day, is that possible? Do you see it possibly going that way? Are we at risk?
Kathleen, sadly, it's already happening. While the sanctions have not been formally lifted, I'm confident that they will be. But even while the sanctions remain in place as a legal matter, enforcement is near zero. And so I don't know, I haven't seen the EIA remarks, but we were at about 500,000 barrels a day that Iran was able to deliver. It's a little foggy because ships turn off their transponders and we can't track everything everywhere. But they went from roughly 3 million barrels a day when we began our sanctions regime in really 2019 to just under 500,000 barrels a day. My guess is that if we're back here a year from now, the Iranians will be delivering to our adversaries 1.5 million or 2 million barrels a day if they can get their industry stood back up that quickly. It's really unfortunate. It certainly reduces America's capacity to deliver this product around the world, but more importantly, it undermines all the work that we had done with the Abraham Accords and to defend our one democratic ally and friend in the Middle East, the Israelis, from the Iranians having the money to continue to foment terror around the world. It's incomprehensible that they're headed back down this path. You see what's happening today in Israel with rockets coming from Hamas, another Iranian-backed militia. When a government is weak, deterrence fails and it begets real threats. Real war follows from weakness, and I fear that we're headed back that direction.
We all find that very troubling with our friends in Israel and what they are under attack right now with Hamas coming out of the Gaza Strip and all. How do you see that being resolved? Where is that going?
I hope the administration finds that equivocating, that treating the Palestinian attacks on Israel as equivalent to the Israeli efforts to defend their nation. I hope this administration will find that that is not a model that will deliver good outcomes, mostly good outcomes for the United States, but certainly for our friends in Israel and the Middle East, and they will rethink how they think about their broader Middle East strategy. We had 3 pieces to it, right? We crushed their regime in Iran, we supported the Israelis, and we built out the conditions where amazing Arab leaders like Mohammed bin Zayed and the Crown Prince in Bahrain were able to deliver peace, real peace between Israel and those countries, something that for 40 years had eluded them and us. It made Americans safer, and I know that those who are serving in the Department of Defense were some of the happiest people when we were able to announce those peace accords, because they knew that the risk that they would have to deploy forces there to secure American freedom was greatly reduced. I hope this administration will rethink the path they're headed down. I'm not optimistic.
Unfortunately. Mr. Secretary, you've talked in your opening remarks about relationships, and as we join with this entire group here, we are all so thankful to be back together, sharing our industry and our technology. It's about networking and relationships, and you've recognized that. So as we wrap this up here, I know we have I want to ask you, many of us are aware of your time at the United States Military Academy at West Point.
Yes.
First in your class. You have served in Congress. You have worked with the state of Kansas. You have a lifetime of service to this great nation. We are very grateful for that. And I would like any parting words that you can have for us as an industry you've gained from your experience.
Well, that's a tall order. You forgot my most important job. I was 5th grade Sunday school teacher.
Ah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The best preparation for being a member of Congress you can possibly imagine. This is an amazing nation that we had the privilege to live in. I am long on America. I am long that for 50 and 100 years, and as far as we can see, that if we get it right, if we do the things that each of us needs to do, that it will continue to be the most exceptional nation in history. I believe that with all my heart. It didn't happen during the Revolutionary War. It didn't happen in the Civil War. It didn't happen again in the 1960s without hard work from people like you all who were engaged, who went to PTA meetings and said your piece, who ran for city council, who volunteered to help a candidate running for office, who served food to the elderly, all the things that we know that make up the greatness of our nation. If we keep our eye on the ball there, and we make sure that our schools are teaching what I just described, then I have enormous confidence that we'll, 50 years from now, all be wheeled into Bismarck and have another great conference, and that America will still be a place that we can tell our grandkids we were a part of, we passed the torch, and that our republic will stand. I believe that with all my heart. I could see it when I traveled the world. Nations wanted to tell the story of America in decline. The Chinese spend their entire propaganda budget trying to convince the world that whether it's Black Lives Matter or whatever it is, that America is falling apart, that we are a nation in decline. I don't believe it for a second. I do believe that each and every one of us has a responsibility to make sure that it is not true, to continue to do what we do, to get up every day and go innovate and create and add jobs and take care of those around us, our communities. If we do those things, if we do them well, the Chinese will be wrong, I will prove to be right, and each of us will be very proud to call America the greatest nation in the history of civilization. Those would be my parting words. I am an enormous optimist. I believe in America deeply. I know you all do. It'll take real work, but we will make this continue to be an amazing, amazing country. Thank you all for joining me here this morning.
Kathy, thank you. Mr. Secretary, it's been just an honor and a pleasure. And on behalf of everyone here and North Dakotans, we want to make sure that we are the first to invite you back here as the 47th President of the United States.
Thank you all. Thanks, Lynn. Thank you, sir. God bless you.
All right. Well, that concludes our conference. Thanks to all of you. This has just been a fantastic event, and it's because you all came and we got up and did it, and we stood up and made ourselves proud. So thank you for coming. Drive safe, and we appreciate our sponsors, our exhibitors, and everybody that made this happen. So thank you very much.